Chapter 1231, Location of Boundless Mountain. Translator, Cetulin. Editor, Cetulin. The tiny red snake was about the length of an index finger and as thin as a willow leaf. It raised its tiny head and looked at Iyun from the bull's mouth. Iyun's hand silently pressed down on his interspatial ring. From the first moment he saw the girl, he knew that she was absolutely not immortal. How could the energy fluctuations within her deceive Iyun's senses? Be it the bamboo basket or the bowl of water she offered, Iyun had noticed something amiss with them. He never expected that the seemingly dilapidated village would be home to such a sinister girl. "Did you kill the people of this village?" "I'm not someone with a strong sense of justice that needs to help the weak, as it has nothing to do with me. But since you've provoked me today, I'll seek revenge for the villagers in passing." As Iyun spoke, he took out a 4-foot-long sword. This was an ordinary sword he randomly took out from his interspatial ring. Although Iyun had obtained Mirage Snow, it was Huan Qinshua's family heirloom. Iyun would not use it wantonly against any enemy. Ha ha ha! What an audacious tone, watch me as I eat you. As the girl spoke, 2 pale red crescent blades appeared in her hands out of thin air. From the quality of the blades, they seemed to be formed from the fangs of a particular beast. The moment the 2 blades appeared, the surrounding atmosphere turned scorching. The 2 blades slashed over, targeting Iyun's sword. The girl had extraordinary discernment. She could tell at a glance that the sword Iyun had taken out was only of an ordinary grade. Against her beast fang blades, the only outcome was for it to be cleaved apart. Ding! A clear sound rang as Iyun's sword was nipped by the 2 crescent blades as though a snake had its weak spot clasped. The girl laughed elegantly as she exerted force in a bid to break Iyun's sword. But the moment she used her strength, the girl's expression changed. It was as though Iyun's sword was a divine weapon that could not be snapped apart. Then, she felt an immense rebounding force, causing her to nearly lose her grip on her crescent blades. At that moment, Iyun shook his right hand and, with a sword hum ringing, his sword transformed into a beam of light that came straight at the girl's chest. Ah! The girl was alarmed as she retreated frantically. She barely dodged the strike, but the clothes on her chest had been slashed apart by the sword beam, revealing snow-white skin beneath. The girl turned embarrassed and infuriated as she shouted sharply, "Die!" Pang! With an explosion, the porcelain bowl that was placed on the table exploded suddenly. The tiny red snake in the bowl shot at Iyun's glabella like a sharp arrow. And at the same time, the girl's venomous snake that transformed from a bamboo basket followed closely behind, aiming for Iyun's throat. The 2 snakes of varying sizes leapt for Iyun's vital spots simultaneously. Iyun scanned them with a glance and could immediately tell that the 2 snakes were not actually true snakes, but nomological manifestations. Especially the tiny red snake. It attacked with terrifying bloodlust, and when it opened its jaws it was as though blood pools from hell had descended upon the world. Laws of blood? Iyun's heart palpitated slightly. He had somewhat underestimated the girl. The laws of blood were originally quite uncommon laws. Their means of killing were strange and tended towards the unorthodox. Very few warriors were aware of them. As for the other snake, it was refined from highly venomous objects. If it were to enter his body, it would tear through his stomach and intestines. One side was blood while the other side was venom. With the 2 strange blades in the girl's hand, anyone from the younger generation would probably succumb to her. Unfortunately, she was facing Iyun. Iyun put away his sword and stretched out both arms, tapping gently on the 2 snakes. A gray aura blasted out, enveloping the 2 tiny snakes. Destruction Dao Domain. By releasing the Destruction Dao Domain in a tiny region, it had a similar effect as the 10,000 Demon Wheel of Existence. However, it drained very little of Iyun's Yuan Qi. Pang! Pang! 2 explosive blasts sounded as the 2 snakes shot right into the gray mist, disintegrating instantly. The girl was dumbfounded when she saw this. That was her ace in the hole. Something she had arduously cultivated in. Yet it was gone, just like that? Before she could even react, Yi-Yun had appeared in front of her like a ghost. He clenched his fist and struck suddenly at the girl's abdomen. Ah! The girl grunted in pain as she spewed a mouthful of blood. Her entire body flew, blasting through the rundown house. She did not stop, flying for thousands of feet, crashing through several houses in the process before collapsing heavily in the ridges. The girl spat out fresh blood mixed with mud. She was severely injured and suffered excruciating pain. She had encountered a tough one. Indeed, one would eventually encounter a ghost if one always walked in the night. The girl knew that a wise girl does not fight when the odds are against her. The malignant star was not to be offended, so she was bent on hiding. The girl had engaged in her sinister acts for years and mastered many a great escape skill. Just as she created an avatar as an attempt to slink off, she heard a murderous voice booming in her ear. Don't you think of escaping through the ground? I have already locked onto you with my perception. If you make another move, your head will roll. The girl's body froze as she felt a chill down her back. Instantly, she did not dare to move. He was a true malignant star. Just as the thought of escaping came to her, she was discovered. There was no means of survival for her. At that moment, Yi-Yun had walked in front of the girl. Clenching her collar, he lifted her directly. The girl was very light and felt like an accessory in Yi-Yun's hand. Yi-Yun naturally did not stand on ceremony by confiscating the two beast fang blades. He sized up the girl. I thought you were a snake, but you are actually human. I never expected you to be this vicious at your age. The corners of Yi-Yun's mouth curved up. He smiled rather nefariously. If anyone were to see this scene, there was no way they would think of Yi-Yun as a good person. They would see him as an evil bully maltreating a village girl. The girl turned aghast when she saw Yi-Yun's sinister smile. She was afraid of what Yi-Yun would do to her as she hurriedly explained, "Young hero, don't be agitated. I only wanted to commit robbery. I do not eat people. Also, this was an abandoned village, to begin with. The people were not killed by me. I'll ask you a few questions. If you can answer them, I might spare you. If you lie, I'll snap your neck off." Yi-Yun naturally did not show any mercy to people that wanted to harm him. The girl's face was pale. She had intended to submit to Yi-Yun and use her advantages as a girl, saying obsequious things such as, "Big brother, spare me." But when she saw Yi-Yun's fierce look, she could not help but strike those thoughts away. "Go ahead and ask," the girl said helplessly. "Do you know of Boundless Mountain?" The girl shook her head like a rattle. "I do not know of Boundless Mountain, but I've heard of Boundless Chapter." "Oh? Boundless Chapter?" Yi-Yun pondered slightly. The map he had was aged, so it wasn't a surprise if the sect established on Boundless Mountain was named Boundless Chapter. Where is this Boundless Chapter? Do you know of a person named Old Snake from Boundless Chapter? Old Snake? The girl blinked her large eyes without exposing her thoughts. Do you have a grudge against him? Probed the girl. Yi-Yun furrowed his brows. No, why? Oh. That's good. The girl seemed to be relieved as she said, I know Old Snake. He was originally Boundless Chapter's sect master. Sect master? Yi-Yun was immediately relieved when he heard that. From the looks of it, he had found the right person. The Boundless Chapter in question was likely Boundless Mountain. Since it was a place introduced by Huan Xinxue, there must have been something special in Boundless Chapter. He just never expected Old Snake to be Boundless Chapter's sect master. However, Yi-Yun was somewhat curious. As the sect master of a powerful sect, why did he take on the name of Old Snake? It did not sound authoritative. Where is Boundless Chapter now? If you tell me the correct location, I'll spare you. Yi Yun intended to take a trip to Boundless Chapter and hand Huan Qinshua's letter to Old Snake. About that, the girl felt a little embarrassed. Well, I can't answer that one. The territory of Boundless Chapter had been snatched away some years ago, so there's no longer a Boundless Chapter. Yeah. It's already gone. What did you say? Its territory has been snatched away? Yi Yun widened his eyes and felt a little dumbfounded. That right. As for the disciples of Boundless Chapter, they split the assets and escaped collectively. A number of disciples went to a powerful sect known as the Myriad God Ridge. However, as most Boundless Chapter disciples were poor in talent, the Myriad God Ridge was not interested in them. 99% of those who participated in Myriad God Ridge's entrance test failed. So there was no other way out after disbanding. A very small number of people passed the test, becoming part of the Myriad God Ridge. As for Old Snake, it is unknown what methods he used, but he actually managed to pass the Myriad God Ridge's entrance test. I do not know how he managed to pass it at such an old age. Of course, he naturally couldn't be sect master anymore. He should be in Myriad God Ridge at present. Apparently, he does some miscellaneous chores. Upon hearing the girl's words, Yi Yun was left stunned. Was Boundless Chapter truly the place Huan Qinshu had recommended? He originally believed that, for it to be recommended by Huan Qinshu, the place was either a reclusive immortal sect or a powerful faction that controlled millions of miles of territory. Yet it was actually in such an abject state? Chapter 1232, Snake Girl. Translator, Cetulin. Editor, Cetulin. It was fine if Boundless Mountain and Boundless Chapter only had similar names. Most critically, the name of Old Snake was the same as well. In addition, the map pointed here, so it was quite impossible to chalk it up as a coincidence. Could the person Huan Qinshu wanted him to seek out be that Old Snake? The sect's territory had been snatched and the disciples disbanded. The Myriad God Ridge had annexed Old Snake's sect and Old Snake had even entered it to do miscellaneous chores. That was way too ridiculous. How about it? I've told you everything I can tell. Speaking of which, what relation do you have to Old Snake? The girl's eyes moved about nimbly as she probed Yi Yun with a question while watching his expression as though she was attempting to figure out if Yi Yun was lying. A friend of mine told me to find Old Snake, Yi Yun answered honestly. He did not have any reason to conceal it. As the girl meticulously ascertained the matter, she believed that Yi Yun had told the truth. She finally heaved a sigh of relief. You gave me a fright. So we are all one big family. I'm from the Boundless Chapter. Speaking of which, I'm Old Snake's final disciple. We are family. Family. As she spoke, she smacked Yi Yun on the shoulder obstreperously. However, when she finished smacking, she noticed that Yi Yun's expression was unkind. Her smile froze on her face as she awkwardly rubbed her hands together. About that, can you first let me go? Yi Yun put the girl down and asked casually, are you really Old Snake's disciple? Yes. Yes. Didn't you notice that I rear snakes? Upon hearing the girl's reply, Yi Yun felt like numerous mud-hoofed horses were running through his mind. That Old Snake also rears snakes? Well, not really. The girl shrugged. However, the things he used are adorned with snake patterns. For example, the double-handed sword he uses is engraved with 2 coiled snakes. All right then. Yi Yun sighed helplessly as he sized up the girl. Although she had employed some fascinating techniques, compared to Yi Yun's impression of a genius from a large clan, she was greatly inferior. Was Old Snake's final disciple only at this level? Furthermore, when he first met her, she appeared rather heretic. But after being defeated by him, she lost all her backbone. She even appeared to be a little simple-minded. She probably acted fiercer when committing a robbery and returned to her true form when she realized she was not his match. Why didn't you go to Myriad God Ridge? Is it because you failed to pass the entrance test? Asked Yi Yun. The girl stared at him. How could I not pass that test? If I were to go to Myriad Godridge, I'd at least be a core disciple. I just have no intention of going. I was born here and grew up here. Why would I go to the Myriad Godridge? So you began robbing people? Yi Yun scoffed. The girl's face turned red as she said, I still need cultivation resources, don't I? I just never knew that you were that powerful. I really overestimated myself. The girl hurriedly placed Yi Yun on a pedestal, hoping that he would release her as soon as possible. In that case, bring me to Myriad Godridge. Although Old Snake sounded like an oddity, Yi Yun believed in Huan Qinxue. Since he was someone recommended by Huan Qinxue, he had to meet him no matter what. Ah! The girl's expression turned bitter. However, being inferior to him, she could only nod. All right then. But Myriad Godridge is very far. You'll have to fly for half a year. If you want to get there faster, you need to use a teleportation array. The teleportation fee isn't cheap either. As the girl spoke, she stuck her tongue out. She had lived for the past few years through robbery. She was not very wealthy. It's fine. I'll pay it. What's your name? I'm an orphan and without a name. When Master found me, I was amid snakes. Master said his name was Old Snake and that fate had brought us together. So he brought me up. You can call me Snake Girl. That's what Master calls me. Snake Girl. Yi Yun nodded. He never expected the girl to have such a tragic background. By the way, do you know of a person named Bai Yuan? Bai Yuan? Snake Girl came to a pause. Are you talking about the white lunar goddess empress of the Seven Desolates? Oh. Goddess Empress? It appears she's rather famous. Tell me any stories you know about her. She's far more than famous. Snake Girl looked at Yi Yun oddly. Her gaze looked like she had seen a wild man from the mountains. The Seven Desolates are formed by 7 ancient continents. Each continent has an area that even the Calm Sea cannot be compared with. Furthermore, there are all kinds of experts there. Tens of millions of years ago, there was chaos in the Seven Desolates. In a struggle for the Seven Desolates, 7 powerful sects engaged in a mighty world war. The war continued for 1,000 years intermittently. Blood flowed like rivers and countless numbers of warriors and mortals died or were injured. Finally, the white lunar goddess Empress appeared and, with her transcendent strength and personal charm, she gathered a bunch of experts and defeated the 7 mighty sects successively. In the Seven Desolates, she established a divine empire that ruled over all white lunar divine empire. No one expected that outcome. The war between the 7 mighty sects ended with a newly risen faction. Having won the Seven Desolates, the white lunar divine empire ruled the Seven Desolates and inspired awe throughout the sinkhole. For tens of millions of years, there were no more revolts. The white lunar goddess Empress is too strong and no one can beat her. Compared to the white lunar divine empire, the Myriad Godridge is very tiny. It can only have a commanding presence here in the Calm Sea. Snake Girl felt dispirited when she came to that. She seemed reluctant on leaving her personal fief but also yearned to live a grand and spectacular life like the white lunar goddess Empress. White lunar goddess Empress. Seven Desolates divine empire. Yi Yun felt mixed emotions upon hearing all of that. It had been tens of millions of years. Who would remember the great Qian dynasty of the Central State Divine Territory of yesteryear? Ignoring the sinkhole, even people from the Central State Divine Territory might not remember that a grand empire that inspired awe everywhere once existed on that piece of land. Furthermore, even at the Great Qian Empire's peak, it paled in comparison to the Seven Desolates' divine empire. Years ago, Azure Yang Lord was young and spirited. He had boundless enthusiasm, hoping to establish a foundation that lasted for billions of years with outstanding deeds, but, eventually, Bai Yuan's strike burst his hopes like bubbles. Now, Bai Yuan had established her own white lunar divine empire, writing a glorious history. As for the Azure Yang Lord of yesteryear, there were no legends of him. He was reduced to the embers of history. Thinking back on such a history left one sighing endlessly. I say, why are you asking about the white lunar goddess empress? Also, it's best you do not mention the white lunar goddess empress's name. This is the calm sea, so it should be fine. But in the Seven Desolates, you might be executed for the crime of defiance. Snake Girl blinked as she saw Yi Yun's wistful look after hearing of Bai Yuan's history. Why did this fellow appear in such a deranged state? What sort of person was the white lunar goddess empress? How could she have any relationship with a punk like him? Never mind. Yi Yun shook his head. Let's go. Onwards to Myriad God Ridge. Yi Yun did not want to be too ostentatious, as he had just arrived in the sinkhole. He did not use special items like the God Advent Tower. All he chose was a superior grade spirit boat. Once the spirit boat was taken out of his interspatial ring, it grew in length upon contact with the wind. Soon, it expanded to 100 feet. Come on up, said Yi Yun. Snake Girl blinked her eyes. She coveted the spirit boat she saw. Yi Yun was indeed rich. That was something she was right about. Chapter 1233, Myriad God Ridge. Translator, Cetulin Editor, Cetulin. Most of the sinkhole's calm sea domain was a calm sea that appeared to be boundless. It was uniform and uninteresting. Although there were some natural treasures in the sea, they were usually accompanied by the presence of danger. Since Yi Yun did not plan to explore it, the best way of traversing the great distance of the vast sea was naturally to use a teleportation array. These long-distance teleportation arrays that could easily allow one to travel millions of kilometers were not cheap. At that moment, Yi Yun came to a teleportation array. The person responsible for collecting the teleportation fee was a girl with Fey blood. She had malt-colored skin and was more slender than the average human. She had strong legs and a furry tail behind her back. The teleportation fee is 10 inferior grade spirit jade. The girl hung a standard smile as she said this sweetly. Yi Yun was taken aback when he heard that. Spirit jade? He suddenly realized that he had a problem. The common currency used in the sinkhole was clearly completely different from that of the 12 Empyrean heavens. And most embarrassingly, he did not have this currency. In fact, the 12 Empyrean heavens did not have an officially recognized currency. Every region used different currencies and, most of the time, things were done through a material exchange. For example, the Myriad Divine Territory's myriad runes were obtained from the exchange of goods. Noticing how Yi Yun did not respond or take out any spirit jade, the corners of Snake Girl's mouth twitched. Bro, don't tell me you didn't bring any money? Yi Yun stroked his chin, turned to her, and said, Indeed, I didn't bring any. Pay for me this time. Snake Girl was left stunned for a moment. What a scam. In the end, she was still responsible for paying the fees? Although she wasn't happy about it, she had failed to rob Yi Yun. She was now at Yi Yun's mercy, so she had no choice but to grudgingly comply. It pained Snake Girl's heart to take out 10 inferior grade spirit jade. It was clear that she lacked money in the first place. If it were her alone, there was no way she would be willing to pay to use the teleportation array. Okay. Might I ask where you are going? The girl asked with a smile as she accepted the spirit jade. Myriad God Ridge, answered Snake Girl unhappily. As the teleportation array was activated, a beam of light flashed. Yi Yun and Snake Girl appeared millions of kilometers away. The surroundings had changed completely. They were no longer by the seaside but a lush mountain range. Beneath the mountains was a large city that looked exuberant at a glance. Just after Iyun and Snake Girl stepped out of the teleportation array, it lit up again, and someone else appeared out of the teleportation array. This Myriad Godridge sure is lively. That's natural. Myriad Godridge might be said to be a sect, but in fact, it's not much different from a large country. It's not just warriors, there are many mortals living here as well. It is a very large city that's extremely lively. Snake Girl explained with smug delight. Although Iyun was powerful, he was a foreigner that needed her to answer his questions. Iyun remained silent and gave Snake Girl a cursory glance. He said, "Let's go. Onward to Myriad Godridge." Although they had arrived in the continent where the Myriad Godridge was, they were still a fair distance away from the actual Myriad Godridge. They flew for a period of time before arriving at their destination. The continent was named after the Myriad Godridge. Although there were tiny sects, they paled in comparison when compared to the Myriad Godridge. Myriad Godridge was a truly powerful super sect. Countless subsidiaries depended on the Myriad Godridge. Snake Girl's description of Myriad Godridge being a massive country was in no way hyperbole. During Iyun and Snake Girl's flight, they saw many bustling cities and towns. However, those were not the core regions of the Myriad Godridge. Soon, a towering and majestic mountain ridge appeared in front of them. Its peak pierced straight through the clouds and it looked extremely magnificent. And at the foot of the mountain was a huge city. Its circumference spanned nearly 500 kilometers and the populace numbered tens of millions. This is the Myriad Godridge. Iyun looked at the city and found it grand and lofty. There was also fluctuations from array formations. Flying was forbidden at high altitudes in Myriad Godridge, therefore Iyun and Snake Girl landed at the city gates. 2 inferior grade spirit jade is required for entry, said the guardian of the gate. Iyun glanced at Snake Girl, causing her to make a long face while helplessly taking out 2 inferior grade spirit jade from her interspatial ring. Attempting to rob Iyun was definitely the unluckiest move she ever made. It only ended with her becoming penniless. As Old Snake's disciple, do you have any means of finding him in the fastest way possible? Iyun asked Snake Girl. The city was huge and there were just too many people. The Myriad Godridge was also extremely imposing and filled with countless warriors, so it was impossible for Iyun to search for a needle in a haystack. Snake Girl sighed and flipped her hand. A tiny snake slithered out from her sleeves. Let's use this little guy. However, this little guy can only detect the scent in a 10,000-foot range. Any further and it won't work, explained Snake Girl. Let's give it a try first. Iyun looked at Snake Girl. Speaking of which, how do we enter this Myriad Godridge? The true core of Myriad Godridge was in the Spirit Mountains. Iyun guessed that they needed to head there to find Old Snake. Simply pass the entrance test. It happens every few days as there is a high demand for entering Myriad Godridge. However, most people fail to even pass the first round. Snake Girl said contemptibly. Clearly, she despised people who attempted to enter Myriad Godridge because it was popular. Didn't you say you could easily pass the Myriad Godridge's test? Then let's give it a try. Iyun was a little baffled as to why Old Snake would spend his days in Myriad Godridge, even going as far as doing miscellaneous chores. However, since he was introduced by Huan Shinshue, it was highly unlikely that Old Snake was useless. Perhaps the enlightened had their own ways of doing things. As a super sect, the Myriad Godridge would attract large numbers of people for every test. Iyun and Snake Girl headed for the Myriad Godridge's entry test registration venue and were astounded by the crowd ahead of them. There was a lot of people. Even with the test happening once every few days, there were still myriad people registering. Iyun thought back to the people that came right behind them at the teleportation array. A number of them were probably rushing here for the Myriad Godridge's test. Seeing the large number of people, it did not seem like an exaggeration when Snake Girl said that the disciples of the Boundless chapter failed to pass the test. The Myriad Godridge would definitely only choose a tiny portion of candidates, otherwise, its entrance would burst from the sheer number of people. They stood and waited with the group of people. And at that moment, a middle-aged man walked out from inside. It's Steward Luo. Hey, quiet. It looks like Steward Luo will be helming today's qualifying examination. When Yun heard the discussion, it was apparent that these people were very familiar with the Myriad Godridge. They even knew the names of a steward. It looks like all of you understand the Myriad Godridge very well, asked Yun. The group of people looked over and noticed that it was a youth with a girl about the same age as him that said that. Judging from his clothing that was obviously that of a foreigner, and how the girl dressed in a villager's attire, they immediately understood what was going on. They must have rushed here for the test from some remote place, so they knew nothing. Heh, you must not know. Many of the people here have participated in the test numerous times. The few of us have participated about 7 times, and we basically know all the examiners of Myriad Godridge. A scholarly-looking man dressed in an opulent garb said complacently as he flapped his fan. Snake Girl rolled her eyes. So they were trash, but what was there to be smug about? Chapter 1234, Your robbing business is doing well. Translator, Cetulin Editor, Cetulin. Yun was rendered somewhat speechless when he heard the scholarly man flaunt himself. Why were these people who had taken the test as many as 7 times qualified to do it again? It was no wonder the test was packed with so many candidates. Many people who failed the first time would come again, but wasn't that a waste of manpower? From Yun's point of view, the Myriad Godridge's test must have been very stringent. Perhaps, there might be several rounds of selection. Those that failed fell very short of the standards required, so, no matter how many times they came, it was pointless. But very quickly, Yun understood why the Myriad Godridge did not mind allowing warriors to participate in the test numerous times. Anyone who registered needed to pay a registration fee of 10 spirit jade for a test token. As there were so many people, about 7,000 to 8,000 of these registration tokens would be handed out. According to his calculations, that meant that every test that was held gave the Myriad Godridge an income of 70,000 to 80,000 spirit jade. Upon realizing this, Yun was somewhat at a loss for words. It was no wonder they held tests with such great ardor. There were large amounts of spirit jade to earn, so why not? It was only bad for people who were far off the mark but continued dreaming of entering the Myriad Godridge. Who else was to blame if they were unable to see the truth for themselves? This line sure is long. A line of 10,000 people moved at a turtle's pace despite there being multiple registration points. Every person that registered needed to fill out a form with their particulars. Therefore, Yun estimated that it would take a day before it reached his turn. Warriors had extremely good patience, but this did not include Yun. Especially considering the fact that he did not place much importance on this matter. He wasn't truly interested in joining the Myriad Godridge, he was only interested in looking for Old Snake. Hey, do you need a registration token and particulars form? It's just 100 spirit jade. There's no need to queue. Amid the noisy environment, Yun heard a voice. When he took a glance, a few shady people were mixed in the crowd, going around and selling the registration tokens. When Yun saw this, he was tickled. Weren't these scalpers? In his previous life, at the ticket-selling booths of train stations or popular concerts, there were always scalpers who would sell tickets they had obtained through various means at a high price. It seemed this world was not an exception to that. Should I also buy a scalp ticket? Just as Yun was pondering over the matter, he noticed Snake Girl watching him warily. The young lass seemed a little dim-witted at times, but, whenever it had anything to do with money, she was like an alert mouse. She had a natural sensitivity towards any danger her money purse might suffer. Yun coughed dryly once and was about to speak. But at that moment, Yun suddenly heard an old man shout at the top of his lungs, "Great offer for registration tokens. Only 98. 98, folks. You'll only suffer if you can't buy it, and you'll be scammed if you don't buy it. Money transaction on the spot and the token will be yours. When Yun heard the shout, he nearly choked. Even other scalpers who was selling registration tokens were doing it covertly and privately asked examinees if they wanted one. No one was like the old man, who seemed to wish he had a loudspeaker. Yun turned over to take a look, and indeed, he saw a few Myriad Godridge supervisors sporting extremely ugly expressions. Although earning Spirit Jade was a goal for holding a recruitment test, it was a more covert goal. On the surface, they were doing it as part of the process to select disciples for the Myriad Godridge. It was an extremely solemn occasion. With the old fellow yelling like this, the atmosphere became more like a market. Just as Yun was considering whether or not to try negotiating with the scalper, or if they should spend 98 Spirit Jade to buy a registration token, he noticed that Snake Girl's expression was a little odd. What's wrong? That old man that's shouting about the great offer for the registration token is my master. Old Snake. Snake Girl said in embarrassment. She was rendered completely speechless by her master's actions. After being separated for so many years, she never expected to meet him again in such a manner. He's Old Snake? Yun blinked his eyes. Although he had guessed that the expert would be somewhat different from others, the present situation left him a little dumbfounded. Since he had found Old Snake, there was no need for him to participate in the Myriad Godridge's recruitment test. With a thought, he walked to Old Snake. 98 Spirit Jade. 98 Spirit Jade. Registration token fire sale. Old Snake was shouting with all his might when he suddenly saw Yun walk over. His old face immediately beamed with a wide smile. He truly resembled a pimp from the brothels. How about it, young lad? Do you want to buy a registration token? After buying this registration token of mine, I guarantee you that it will become a golden opportunity, allowing for your meteoric rise. You will enter the sect within a decade, become a guardian in a century, and an elder in a millennium. About that. Yun felt a dark cloud hanging over his head when he heard that. Senior. I'm not here to buy a registration token. I was instructed by a friend to look for you. Friend? What friend? When the old man heard that Yun wasn't there to buy a token, he immediately wiped away the smile on his face. Senior, can we speak in private? Yun said as he cupped his fists. Although the old snake in front of him was a little unique, he still gave him the required respect. Regardless of anything, a person introduced by Huan Shinshue must have something special about him. Say anything you would like to say here. Don't mess up my business. Right here, right now is the best time to sell registration tokens. Speaking of which. When the old man saw Snake Girl among the crowd, he immediately stared with widened eyes. Lass, what are you doing here? As the old man spoke, he left Yun behind and walked towards Snake Girl. Lass, it's been years since we have met. Your cultivation level has grown. How has it been? Has your robbing business been doing well over the past 2 years? Maybe now you have some spare cash, and you are here to give your master some alcohol money as a form of filial piety? Old Snake had a naturally loud voice. With him deliberately not hiding his voice, many warriors present immediately looked towards Snake Girl. So the old man was the young girl's master. At that moment, Snake Girl yearned for a hole in the ground to burrow in. When she first saw the old man, she was quite delighted. After all, she had not seen the old man in years. Although he was flawed in many ways, he had brought her up and taught her many things. However, this sense of filial affection lasted less than 3 seconds. Snake Girl wished she could kick the old man away and claim that she did not know him. This was too fucking embarrassing. Although I am in the robbery business, will you not shout about it? It was out there for all to see that the master was a scalper that capitalized on illicit trading, while the disciple was a petty thief that robbed. The master-disciple duo sure was one of a kind. Indeed, there were people who could not help but laugh. The gorgeously dressed youth that had participated in the Myriad Godridge's test for 7 times looked at Snake Girl with a teasing expression. He had planned on buying a scalp token, but now that there was an interesting development in the line, he was in no hurry. He could continue queuing in line. Old man, darn you. I only have the bit of money I need for cultivation. How can I have any spare cash for you to go around squandering on vices? Upon mentioning that, Snake Girl turned infuriated. The old man was bent on being indecent. Although rearing a child was a tiring task, he had begun engaging in vices when she was in her teens. He did not do a single good deed. Her cultivation all these years was arduous. She never had what she needed, and could only rely on herself to earn it. Chapter 1235, Impervious. Translator, Cetulin. Editor, Cetulin. The old man thought nothing of Snake Girl's tirade. His skin was thicker than the city walls, and he did not seem to notice the strange looks people were casting at him. How can that be? As the mantra goes, the teacher that teaches you for a day should be regarded as a father for life. I taught you all the means to make a living, and now that I'm old, it's about time I enjoy my retirement. Look at me, even at this age, I'm still waking up early in the morning and going back late at night to do a little business. It's such a tiring life. When the old man said that, the surrounding warriors' eyes nearly popped out from their heads. They had seen shameless people before, but they had never seen one as shameless as this. He even managed to claim that robbing was a means of living. Although a warrior's world was one in which survival of the fittest ruled and robbery wasn't a rare occurrence, to speak of it in such a perfectly justified manner would make even bandits blush slightly. When Iyun saw that the duo was about to engage in another round of banter, he hurriedly interrupted them. Senior, if you lack money for alcohol, I have some means of my own. I can earn money for you, but first I have something I need to ask you. Senior, I wonder if you can spare me some time to speak in private. Iyun wanted to take out Huan Xinshua's letter, but it did not seem suitable to take it out in public with so many wandering eyes. Old Snake had originally written Iyun off, but when he heard that there was money to be made, his tiny pair of eyes lit up. He turned back to look at Iyun. Lad, you have some brains. How about it, do you want to be my disciple? The benefits of being my disciple are nearly infinite. In Myriad Godridge, just say my name and no one will dare bully you. Old Snake said this in an earnest and patient manner, but the people around them were already bursting with laughter. Iyun was a little dumbfounded. He had originally guessed that Huan Xinshua had instructed him to seek Old Snake to be his disciple. He already felt that Old Snake's personality was somewhat unique and there should be some difficulty in being accepted as his disciple. He never expected Old Snake to throw himself forward and offer himself as a master. Wasn't such a master worthless? Where was his dignity as an expert? Although it sounded unreliable, Iyun considered the matter. Since Old Snake had already said so, he might as well go with the flow and acknowledge this master as he was. After all, there was no harm. But just at that moment, Snake Girl rolled her eyes at the old man and grumbled, "So far, I've paid the fee for the teleportation array and the city entrance fee. 12 inferior grade spirit jade. I don't even earn that much from one business transaction." Snake Girl was feeling displeased, so she deliberately exposed Iyun. When the old man heard that, he immediately looked Iyun in a different light. No money? If he had no money, what was he doing here acting like a wealthy young master? He immediately coughed dryly and said, "My standards for a disciple are very high. Most people can forget about being my disciple. I would never consider it unless I received 200 spirit jade as a courtesy gift." When the old man said that, a few wealthy young masters present flapped their fans in contempt. 200 spirit jade was considered a high standard? What an ignoramus. The youth in gorgeous clothes said with a laugh, 200 spirit jade. Hee hee, that's really a little expensive. It can barely pay for a meal at Heavenly Joy Tavern." When he said that, the laughter became even more uproarious. They were watching the comedy show of the old man, Snake Girl, and Yi Yun. They originally thought that the old man and Snake Girl were a one-of-a-kind master-disciple duo, but they never expected the youth to also be a clueless ignoramus. This was obviously an old trickster that scammed for food and drink, yet Yi Yun continued addressing him as senior and even tried to show him respect. One had to wonder if he was slow in the head. At that moment, Yi Yun felt a string of curses running through his mind. He did not mind how others viewed him, what bothered him was that the old fellow was such an oddity. He even began to suspect if he had found the wrong person. The boundless mountain he needed to find was no longer Boundless Mountain but Boundless Chapter. In addition, the name Old Snake wasn't so rare. Could it be that this old scammer shared a name with the expert Yi Yun was meant to find? At that moment, Yi Yun did not think it was wise to take out the letter. Yi Yun believed that Huan Chenshua belonged to a family clan that was reclusive. He did not know what sort of mission the family clan had, but he definitely could not expose their existence to strangers. Upon thinking of this, Yi Yun secretly measured the elder's cultivation level. On the surface, the elder was only at the Dao Palace realm. He had an ordinary foundation and was a classic example of not having reached that level by his own strength. However, Yi Yun had the purple crystal. With the purple crystal's energy vision, nothing could be hidden. He activated the energy vision and looked at the elder. What he saw made him gasp. In the energy vision, the elder's cultivation level was still as bad as ever. However, what caught Yi Yun's attention was a blob of hazy gray light in the elder's body. Even with the energy vision, Yi Yun could not identify it. The old man was extraordinary after all. Yi Yun now believed that he had found the right person. He said with a voice transmission, "Senior, Miss Huan gave me a letter that I'm supposed to hand to you." Yi Yun only mentioned the surname. In that way, the possibility of exposing Huan Chenshua was greatly reduced. If he was Old Snake, he should know the name. He carefully observed Old Snake's expression, hoping to find some minute change in it. However, Yi Yun never expected that the old man would fail to hear it. After bantering with Snake Girl all day, he suddenly seemed to recall something. He turned and glanced at Yi Yun, saying blankly, "Lad, did you speak to me just now?" Yi Yun was rendered speechless. The old fellow was truly impervious. "I want to buy one of your registration tokens." Yi Yun had made up his mind. He was bent on following the old man, and since he had already gotten to the Myriad God Ridge, all he needed to do was enter the sect. Old Snake rolled his eyes at Yi Yun. "Do you have money?" At that moment, Snake Girl quickly pressed down on her interspatial ring, worried that he would have thoughts on her money. She knew very well that the old man would not give Yi Yun a discount. "I do not have spirit jade, but what do you think of this fruit?" Yi Yun took out a red and plump fruit. It was a supplementary herb needed for alchemy. It wasn't an extremely expensive fruit, but it was great for brewing alcohol. Because of that, it was always in great demand. Even in the sinkhole, such a fruit could be sold for about 200 to 300 spirit jade. Indeed, Old Snake's eyes lit up when he saw the fruit. Red brewing fruit. Great item. In that case, I'll accept it grudgingly. This token is yours. Old Snake threw a token over. The crowd shook their heads when they saw this. The youth was truly dumb. He had bought a token from the old trickster for more than 2 times the price. He was taking a huge loss. However, Old Snake still had some integrity. He did not demand money from his disciple and gave Snake Girl a registration token for free. With that, the rich scions behind them realized that the buzz was over. They rushed over to buy a registration token. Instantly, Old Snake's business was surprisingly good. He did not have many tokens to begin with, so he sold them all very quickly. Yi Yun walked to the front of the line. The registration booth was in a square up ahead. On one side was a registration booth that accepted money, and on the other was an ordinary testing ground. After obtaining a token, one had to immediately undergo a small test. This meant that before the token could even warm in their hands, they had to return it to Myriad Godridge. It was a complete waste of money. Iyun already had a token, so he directly went to the testing ground. Chapter 1236, Miraculous Item. Translator, Cetulin. Editor, Cetulin. The venue of Myriad Godridge's entry test had a stone gateway erected on the square. It had 4 columns and a stone door made of 3 slabs. Gateways such as these were typically erected in front of villages in the mortal world to honor top scholars or chaste and heroic women. The design was very rarely seen in a warrior's world. On the surface, the stone gateway wasn't special in any way. It even seemed a little out of place, standing in the middle of the square. However, when Iyun saw the stone monument, his brows pricked up slightly. He could tell that behind the stone gateway was the path to a pocket world. If he circled behind the stone gateway, there would be nothing, but if he were to travel through the gateway's stone door, he could step into that pocket world. However, there was a restriction set up in front of the stone door. If one did not understand the restriction's rules, it would be impossible to gain entry. At that moment, a group of people, including Iyun, had obtained their registration tokens and were standing before the stone gateway. They were waiting for the test in a daze, unsure of what the stone gateway was for. "Senior, if I were to be recruited by the Myriad Godridge, would you give me the honor of treating you to some alcohol?" Iyun stood in front of the stone gateway and, after gathering his thoughts, he quipped with Old Snake. The old fellow would probably not reject an offer of alcohol. Indeed, Old Snake beamed when he heard that. "That sounds good. I'm warning you, I'm very picky about my alcohol and I do not fancy any of the ordinary stuff." As Old Snake spoke, he took out an alcohol gourd. He deliberately shook it and the sound of alcohol splashing emitted from it. Following that, he pulled out the stopper and took a delightful swig. When the people around them heard their conversation, they were rendered speechless. What sort of person was this? Why did his tone sound as though the Myriad Godridge was some tea shop that he could enter as he pleased? Such behavior could be expected from a crazy old man, but the youth was equally dim-witted. Iyun naturally ignored the people around him. As he observed the stone door, he sneered. The examinees were making a din, but none noticed that 3 men and a woman were standing behind the stone gateway, watching them indifferently. They were dressed in purple and the words Myriad God were embroidered on their chests. Iyun could tell that despite the purple clothes appearing to be made of a soft fabric, they were, in fact, superior-grade defensive clothes. Even the Myriad God words that were embroidered were sewn using heavy gold from the deep sea. The gold powder from such deep-sea metal was great for writing Dao patterns. Although the Myriad God words looked like text, they were actually a Dao pattern in and of themselves. Carved within them were laws that were no trifling matter. Without a doubt, the 3 men and woman must have had illustrious standing in the Myriad Godridge. At that moment, the 4 of them stood in the pocket world and, with the stone gateway's restrictions isolating them, no one could see them. Amid their indifferent expressions or haughty looks that seemed seared into their faces, a man with thick brows glanced at Iyun because he had heard Iyun offer to treat Old Snake to alcohol after he entered Myriad Godridge. It incurred his displeasure. "Senior Brother G, look at the kind of people that want to enter our Myriad Godridge as disciples. Every time, we see a bunch of useless people coming to join in the buzz. Listen to what they say. He's even more confident of entering the sect than me. They seem to think that the Myriad Godridge will accept anyone." Upon hearing the thick-browed man grumble, the woman shook her head and said, "The recruitment test is held once every 3 days, with 10,000 entrants every time. The ones that we should recruit have mostly been recruited. So it's natural that we are only left with the useless ones. It is only normal for these situations to occur." After hearing the woman's comment, the thick-browed man asked perplexedly, "Senior Sister Jean, I have never understood this matter. Our Myriad Godridge is one of the best major sects in the Kamsi region, but isn't the recruitment test being run too frequently? Are we really only doing this for the tens of thousands of spirit jade in recruitment fees? That is what the women from Clear Lunar Island say of us. Their strength might not be on par with our Myriad Godridges, but they only do a disciple recruitment every 2 years. Furthermore, it is an extremely stringent selection, taking in only geniuses. They mock our recruitment test as a gathering ground of mediocrity. The woman wanted to explain but stopped mid-sentence. At that moment, the man that had been addressed as Senior Brother G spoke. He said, "Junior Sister Jean, there's no need to be apprehensive. In a few days, Junior Brother Song will become a disciple of Elder Tai Ching. In a way, he will become a personal disciple as well. The matters in question are no longer secrets among personal disciples, so there's no harm in telling him." "All right then." The woman nodded and looked at the thick-browed man. She said, "Our Myriad Godridge has a miraculous item. Its actual origins are unknown even to the elders of Myriad Godridge. It seems to seal a world inside of it, and that world contains precious treasures. And this miraculous item will only recognize certain fated people. This fate is hard to determine, too. One would imagine that people with higher talent would be first in line with this fate, but it is not so. Decades ago, there was a youth whose talent was ordinary and his nomological insight was as terrible as could be. He managed to stir the object and attract something out. That something was valued greatly by the patriarch, and as a result, the youth became a core disciple." Patriarch? Upon hearing that word, Junior Brother Song, who had spoken, widened his eyes. The Myriad Godridge's patriarch was very seldom heard of, much less seen. It was frequent not to hear anything from him for hundreds of thousands of years, and it was unknown if he was in seclusion or touring the world. In the calm sea, the Myriad God Patriarch was feared by all. He was not born from the calm sea but came from the depths of the sinkhole. He was like a godlike existence to the Myriad Godridge. For people like Junior Brother Song, it was rare for them to even meet the sect master, so the Patriarch was someone they couldn't even cast their sights on. Now that he managed to hear some information regarding the Patriarch, Junior Brother Song felt extremely excited. Therefore, with that precedent, and according to the instructions of the sect master, we have been searching for people of fate all these years. However, even the amount of fate that one has can vary. It's very rare to find someone with great fate. You might think nothing of these candidates, but what if one of them is a person of fate? Senior Sister Jin's explanation made Junior Brother Song's blood boil with excitement. The Myriad Godridge indeed had deep roots. Furthermore, he had chanced upon news of the Patriarch. As long as the Patriarch was around, the Myriad Godridge would remain Lord of the Calm Sea. It would be great if he could become a personal disciple of the Patriarch. Such a thought flashed across Junior Brother Song's mind, but such an extravagant hope was only in his imagination. All right, stop discussing such matters. You just need to do your job. Let's begin the recruitment test. At that moment, a middle-aged man's voice sounded as a middle-aged man dressed in purple robes walked out from the deep depths of the pocket world. He was lanky in build and his body effused a blade-like aura. Behind him was a blurry haze that seemed like a void of chaos. Even a single glance at it made one feel like their gaze was being sucked into it. Chapter 1237, Ascending Dragon Cauldron. Translator, Cetulin. Editor, Cetulin. The moment the middle-aged man appeared, the three men and the woman in the pocket world greeted him with deference. Martial Uncle M.O. Martial Uncle M.O. The Myriad Godridge's test was held very frequently, so it was sufficient for the personal disciples to preside over it. But if the sect's divine item was being taken out, an expert at the elder level was needed. When the middle-aged man appeared, Yun sensed an aura as vast as the seas. He immediately withdrew his perception. Oh? Mo Shanqing looked up, seemingly sensing something. Master Uncle, what's the matter? Nothing. Mo Shanqing shook his head. Maybe there's some old fellow interested in our Myriad Godridge's test. It doesn't matter. There's no point in coveting our Myriad Godridge's divine item. Mo Shanqing didn't bother over who was there. Although his presiding over the test involved the sect's divine item, he could not influence the divine item at all. It was even more impossible for others. I'll be staying in this pocket world and not going out. All of you can go out and continue the procedure as usual, Mo Shanqing said indifferently. He had no interest towards such a test. The candidates that registered were of too low a standard, and it was basically a waste of his time. Trying to find someone that could stir the divine item in a test was too difficult. Yes, Marshal Uncle Mo. The four acceded to the order and stepped out of the stone gateway. The warriors on the square saw a light membrane appear out of thin air from the stone gateway. Following that, 4 Myriad Godridge disciples dressed in purple stepped out of the void. Purple clothes and golden words. They are personal disciples of the Myriad Godridge. Many of those that had come numerous times were not surprised by this scene. Only the candidates that were there for the first time were astonished. However, be it a newcomer or an experienced candidate, all of them showed pangs of envy towards the 4 Myriad Godridge personal disciples. They were personal disciples after all. Most of these candidates, even if they managed to become Myriad Godridge disciples, would very likely be outer sect disciples, which was a glorified way of saying they did miscellaneous chores. There was a huge gap between them and personal disciples. The quartet was already accustomed to being the object of envy. Their purple clothes made them the highlight of wherever they were. Welcome, fellow warriors participating in our Myriad Godridge's recruitment test. Our Myriad Godridge selects disciples primarily based on their wisdom roots. If one possesses a wisdom root, regardless of how bad their cultivation level is, they would be able to enter our Myriad Godridge and become at least an inner sect disciple. We feel sorry for those that do not have the wisdom root. But then, at least, we can consider you based on bone age and talent. However, we do not consider anyone that has not entered the Tao manifestation realm before the age of 100. Even if they have entered the Tao Palace realm, we would need to ascertain their nomological insights. The person who introduced the recruitment rules was Senior Brother G. There were 3 aspects of the Myriad Godridge's recruitment test. The first aspect evaluated one's wisdom root, the second tested their cultivation level and bone age, while the third tested one's laws. In fact, with so many people gathered, a large number of the candidates did not even meet the second aspect's standards. They pinned all their hopes on the first aspect. No one knew what the wisdom root was. Only the Myriad Godridge paid attention to it. For many, it was their only chance to make a meteoric rise. However, over the many years of testing, the number of people with wisdom roots were few and far between. Alright, without further ado, let's begin now. Senior Brother G waved his hand as he spoke. The stone gateway's light screen flashed as a gray mist flew out from it. The moment the mist appeared, the atmosphere changed immediately. What was once a bustling square turned into a gray and fuzzy scene. A strong repressive feeling made people unable to speak. The warriors with weaker cultivation levels had to stop themselves from kneeling towards the gray mist. The gray mist gradually rose into the sky, fusing with the layer of clouds. Finally, it formed a gigantic gray vortex that spun slowly. In its black core, lightning spewed out as though it was connected to another world. This is... Ian squinted his eyes as he could see a bronze cauldron through the black vortex. The cauldron had 3 feet and 2 handles. The walls of the cauldron were thick and unadorned. There was a swirling black divine dragon engraved on it, and, as wisps of black gases spewed out of the cauldron, the divine dragon seemed to come to life as it was immersed in the black gases. This is the Ascending Dragon Cauldron, which is also the cornerstone item of the Myriad Godridge, Senior Brother G said proudly. Although the cauldron was claimed to be the cornerstone item of the Myriad Godridge, even the Patriarch could not refine and control it. They could only conjure it, but there was no worry that someone might snatch it up. The cauldron was sentient, so no one would be able to take it. Now, produce a drop of your blood and cast it into the cauldron. If you can cause the ascending dragon cauldron to resonate, it's considered a pass. You will become our sect's inner sect disciple. If you can cause the ascending dragon cauldron to produce a sliver of divine light, you can become a core disciple of our myriad God Ridge. If you can stir the ascending dragon cauldron, as long as you do not have atrocious talent, you can even become a personal disciple. Senior Brother G did not continue after saying that. In fact, stirring the ascending dragon cauldron might even produce treasures. That was what the patriarch was truly looking out for. However, that was a secret of the myriad God Ridge. Only personal disciples were allowed to know of it, so there was no need for him to announce it in public. Then, let's begin now. All you need to do is to cast a drop of blood. A drop of blood? Yi Yun frowned slightly. He did not mind if it were only his perception, but if he needed to cast his blood, which contained his lifeblood mark, he had a nagging feeling that it wasn't safe. Yet at that very moment, there were examinees beside Yi Yun who had already bitten their fingers and flicked a drop of their blood from their fingertips. They naturally did not consider things as much as Yi Yun. The Myriad God Ridge's recruitment test had been held numerous times, and every time, nearly 10,000 people cast their blood into the ascending dragon cauldron. They watched as their blood flew into the vortex, but most of the blood droplets were instantly dissipated by the violent Yuan Qi when they flew into the vortex. They became blood mists that eventually vanished. Less than 10% of the remaining blood drops reached the ascending dragon cauldron. However, they directly disappeared upon contact with the ascending dragon cauldron as though they had been absorbed. The ascending dragon cauldron did not undergo any changes. It remained floating amid the huge vortex as its massive and majestic stance repressed the heaven and earth. Many people were unwilling to admit defeat. They continued watching the blood that had been splattered elsewhere, hoping that a miracle would happen. However, the ascending dragon cauldron remained unyielding like a mountain. They had ultimately failed. It's too difficult. Some people shook their heads. What exactly was this wisdom root? How was it possible to stir the ascending dragon cauldron? Yi Yun watched all of this silently. After the first batch of people failed, another batch of people bit open their fingers and flicked their blood. The cauldron was odd. Just as Yi Yun was pondering over the matter, he suddenly saw that, in a corner of the square, Old Snake also looked up at the floating ascending dragon cauldron. Within his tiny eyes, there was an inadvertent glint. Oh! This old man. Was he interested in the ascending dragon cauldron? Yi Yun's impression of Old Snake was that of a jolly old scammer. It was rare to see him looking so serious. Could it be? Yi Yun suddenly realized a possibility. Perhaps the old man was spending his days in the Myriad God Ridge because of the ascending dragon cauldron? Recalling the conversation between the 4 Myriad God Ridge personal disciples beyond the gateway, and how Old Snake was scalping tickets at the recruitment line, Yi Yun felt that it was not an impossible conclusion. Chapter 1238, Stirring the Cauldron. Translator, Cetulin. Editor, Cetulin. Batch after batch of candidates let out their blood in a bid to stir the ascending dragon cauldron. However, all of them failed. Most of the blood dissipated in the vortex storms, and there were some who resented the outcome so much that they bit at their fingertips after failing the first time, producing more blood to try again. The 4 personal disciples did not stop these continued attempts. They knew that it was impossible to succeed on a second try after failing the first time. Meanwhile, Snake Girl was hesitating as she stood beside Yi Yun. Then, she took out a dainty snakeskin dagger from her interspatial ring. You want to give it a shot too? Yi Yun looked at Snake Girl in astonishment. He originally believed that Snake Girl would not be willing to join the Myriad God Ridge. I'll just give it a try. Joining the Myriad God Ridge wouldn't be the worst thing. Since my master is here, I'm too lazy to return. Robbing isn't a long-term plan, anyway. As Snake Girl spoke, she cut her index finger and a drop of blood floated out. Aren't you going to try? Snake Girl looked at Yi-Yun. Let me watch first. I have a nagging feeling that there's something strange about the ascending dragon cauldron. Are you worried that a trap might activate when your blood touches the cauldron? Snake Girl read Yi-Yun's mind. We are only a bunch of lowly candidates. There's no reason for them to scheme against us. Even if it was really a blood contract, the contract's contents would still need to be sent to your soul. If you didn't agree to it, they couldn't bind you to a contract with just a drop of blood. As Snake Girl spoke, her drop of blood floated off. What Snake Girl said wasn't without reason. Warriors unintentionally lost blood during battles all the time. It would be too easy to obtain another's blood, so it was naturally impossible to use a drop of blood to force the signing of a soul contract. Yi-Yun nodded, but he still didn't move as he watched Snake Girl's drop of blood. When the blood flew into the vortex, it remained coagulated within the storms. When it approached the ascending dragon cauldron, the drop of blood emitted wispy crimson beams of light. This is... Yi-Yun pricked up his brows. At the same time, he heard the bronze cauldron hum. Wang! The ascending dragon cauldron let out a sound like a heavy divine bell being struck. The black dragon carved on the cauldron seemed to be flying within the Yuan-Chi wantonly as its eyes emitted a glimmer that left people apprehensive. Many of those present were being watched by the pair of dragon eyes, and they felt as though their hearts were being struck a heavy blow. Their organs churned as a result. Even the 4 personal disciples felt immense pressure. They were unable to maintain their aloof expressions, for the humming noises from the ascending dragon cauldron numbed their ears. Who stirred the ascending dragon cauldron? Senior Brother G was astonished. There had been too many drops of blood flying in the air for him to notice. Only when the cauldron vibrated suddenly did he react. Then, something else happened. Phew! 2 dark golden beams of light shot out from the flying dragon's eyes towards Snake Girl. They were like 2 swords bestowed by the heavens. Snake Girl similarly did not expect it. She made no effort to dodge the 2 beams of divine light, partly because she couldn't react in time. Sha! When the divine beam entered her body, it went straight for her dantian. Snake Girl felt as though something was inside her dantian. Following that, her entire body began to float up. Amid the tempest, her clothes and long hair flared in the wind. Snake Girl's blood stirred the ascending dragon cauldron? Yi-Yun was astonished as well. He had heard the 4 personal disciples' private conversation. Stirring the ascending dragon cauldron was an extremely difficult task. He never expected Snake Girl to be someone that possessed the so-called wisdom root. The storm lasted for about 2 minutes before it calmed down. The people present looked at Snake Girl in astonishment. Apart from the disbelief in his eyes, the gorgeously dressed youth from earlier felt a deep sense of envy when he looked at Snake Girl. A drop of her blood stirred the cauldron. She could become a core disciple, at the very least. This girl actually had such good luck? He originally thought that, by having the crazy old scammer as a master, she was likely a lowlife. However, he never expected that her single drop of blood could stir the ascending dragon cauldron, allowing her to soar instantly. Swish! At that moment, a flash appeared at the stone gateway's entrance. A middle-aged man stepped out. He was the one that the 4 personal disciples had addressed as Martial Uncle M.O. In a blink of an eye, he had appeared in front of Snake Girl with fanatical delight. He had clearly seen that 2 beams of divine light had been shot into Snake Girl's dantian. According to past experiences, the 2 divine beams of light were actually 2 treasures. The treasures were hidden in the world within Snake Girl's body. That was what the patriarch paid great attention to. You have stirred the ascending dragon cauldron. Great! 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 Emo Shanqing complimented her thrice, and there was a glow in the way he looked at Snake Girl. There's no need for you to continue participating in the test. I'll send you straight into the sect. From today forth, you will be a core disciple of our myriad god Ridge. Emo Shanqing said excitedly. He originally thought that presiding over the test would be a waste of his time, but here he had encountered a girl that could stir the cauldron. As such, the patriarch would likely reward him handsomely. Snake Girl never expected such a thing to happen either. She was momentarily flustered. Although she believed that she would have no problem passing the test, she was basing her beliefs on the second and third round of the Myriad God Ridge's entrance test. She had never expected to become a Myriad God Ridge disciple by passing the so-called Wisdom Root test. Thank you, Senior. I'll follow you up the mountain in a while. As Snake Girl spoke, she looked at her master, Old Snake, and Yi Yun. Old Snake did not express himself in any way. As for Yi Yun, it was unclear what he was ruminating over. Although Snake Girl had been forcefully brought to Myriad God Ridge by Yi Yun and had spent more than 10 spirit jade because of him, she did not have any malice towards him. Instead, she had quite a favorable opinion of him and wanted to see how his test unfolded. In fact, apart from Yi Yun, there were a handful of people left who had not produced their blood. Who else hasn't attempted? Produce your blood together now. After recruiting a disciple, Emo Shanqing was in great spirits. Although it was unlikely that the remaining people stood a chance, they were not to be missed. When they heard Emo Shanqing's words, the remaining candidates naturally bit their fingers and produced drops of blood. They had previously been too nervous to produce their blood. They had waited all this time. As such, only Yi Yun was the one who had yet produced his blood. At the instant the ascending dragon cauldron stirred, Yi Yun had sensed an immense ruggedness when the ascending dragon cauldron shot out the beams of divine light. They possessed an aura he seemed familiar with. It resembled the pure yang broken sword that he once had. Could the ascending dragon cauldron be related to the pure yang broken sword? If the cauldron was truly related to the pure yang broken sword, then Yi Yun could not miss this opportunity. Perhaps he could take advantage of this opportunity to figure something out. Should I produce my blood? Yi Yun looked at Emo Shanqing, who was beside him. He hesitated for a moment. He could not predict what the outcome would be. Under the present circumstances, it would not be a wise choice to probe the ascending dragon cauldron as it would cause a huge stir. The final candidates that produced their blood finally ended with failure. Only a few of their blood drops even reached the ascending dragon cauldron, and they failed to instigate any reaction. These people were immensely disappointed. They felt greatly set back when they compared themselves to Snake Girl, who had stirred the cauldron. It's over. Then, let's put an end to this. Although Emo Shanqing noticed that Yi Yun had not produced his blood, he did not mind if a person or two was left out. Yes, Martial Uncle. The 4 personal disciples walked over and were about to withdraw the ascending dragon cauldron and disperse the crowd of people. Yi Yun, why aren't you giving it a try? Snake Girl whispered from the side. Yi Yun exhaled and with his finger as a sword blade, he cut his finger. A drop of blood fluttered into the sky. Yi Yun had largely ascertained that sending his blood to the ascending dragon cauldron did not pose any danger. Furthermore, the similarities between the ascending dragon cauldron and the pure yang broken sword made him want to give it a try. Upon seeing Yi Yun produce his blood, Emo Shanqing came to a halt and looked up. Although he wasn't pleased with the candidate's slow reaction, he did not mind waiting a little while longer. High in the sky, wind and thunder interleaved one another. The drop of blood appeared inconspicuous amid them. It easily penetrated the black vortex and smacked right between the eyes of the dragon engraved on the ascending dragon cauldron. The drop of blood infused into the dragon eye like a blood teardrop. Instantly, the ascending dragon cauldron fell silent. Even the howling wind quietened. Emo Shanqing's face flashed a look of uncertainty. This is... Roar! Suddenly, a bold and vigorous dragon roar emitted from the ascending dragon cauldron. The dragon's roar instantly penetrated the firmament and echoed throughout the land in a deep baritone. The people present found themselves squelched. The candidates with weaker cultivation levels could not even resist the dragon's repression as they collapsed to the ground immediately. Even the candidates with higher cultivation levels felt their minds and hearts palpitating. Accompanied by the dragon's roar, a gray mist spewed out from the ascending dragon cauldron, as though something was peeking out from it. Amid the wind and thunder, the ascending dragon cauldron rapidly expanded to the size of a hill. The black winds made the cauldron turn blurry as a black lightning bolt as thick as a water bucket tore through the clouds. "What's that?" someone exclaimed from the crowd. The black clouds in the sky curled, but there were people who could vaguely make out that within the cauldron that had expanded dozens of times in size, a humongous dragon head phantom had gradually surfaced. Dragon! Was there a dragon sealed within the cauldron? Yi Yun held his breath. The dragon head was simple but infinite. The terrifying dragon repression surged over everyone with its appearance. Its gaze seemed to penetrate the vestiges of time, and it was cast directly on him. Instantly, Yi Yun felt the purple crystal within his body quiver gently. In his mind, a sound seemed to ring. It was the dragon roar that came from the clouds, and there was a language hidden within it that Yi Yun did not understand. It was ancient and profound. But the feeling it left could only be described as ephemeral. This is. Mo Shanqing suddenly became agitated as he turned his head suddenly, looking at Yi Yun with disbelief. The dragon roar and the dragon head that surfaced was a phenomenon that had never been seen before. Could this candidate that appeared slow to react be able to completely stir the ascending dragon cauldron? Although there was no apparent standard for the wisdom root needed to stir the cauldron, Mo Shanqing was actually a little aware of what it took. He never expected that the youth in front of him would be able to satisfy the patriarch's conditions. It was already fairly impressive to discover a few people that could stir the ascending dragon cauldron in a year, but today, one had managed to pull out treasures from the cauldron. 2, in fact. The other one was getting an even more exaggerated response. With such lucky circumstances, he was wondering how the patriarch would reward him. Just thinking of it made Mo Shanqing increasingly excited. It was truly an unknown what special treasure would be coming out. If they were anything short of amazing, there wouldn't have been such an exaggerated phenomenon. However, just as Mo Shanqing was reeling in excitement, the black dragon's phantom gradually dissipated. The resounding dragon roar also vanished. The wind and thunder that surged around the ascending dragon cauldron gradually shrunk, and in moments, the cauldron returned to its original state. It silently floated in the middle of the vortex as though whatever had happened before was a dream that had never happened. Mo Shanqing's eyes widened as he stared intently at the ascending dragon cauldron. He anticipated a few divine beams of light to shoot out from the ascending dragon cauldron and into Yi Yun's dantian. But after a long wait, nothing happened. That was it. Were there no treasures? Mo Shanqing was stupefied. The entire process of Yi Yun's stirring of the cauldron was more exaggerated than the girl from before. Yet, there was no reaction. How could that be? He believed he had accomplished something big, but, in a blink of an eye, he found that he had rejoiced too soon. Martial uncle, what's going on? The 4 personal disciples gathered around and looked at Mo Shanqing before sizing up Yi Yun curiously. Wasn't this punk the one that promised to treat that old scalper to alcohol if he entered the Myriad God Ridge? This fellow is actually one that possesses a wisdom root? Martial uncle, this youth has also passed the test, right? Ji asked. Mo Shanqing was immersed in his vicissitude of emotions and still in a daze. Only when he heard the inquiry did he return to reality with a hesitant expression. This situation was something he had never seen before. If the criteria was to stir the ascending dragon cauldron, then Yi Yun naturally passed. However, he was puzzled by the youth's lack of treasures despite the huge commotion. "You, produce a drop of blood and give it another try," Mo Shanqing said as he looked at Yi Yun. Yi Yun frowned. Although producing a few drops of blood meant nothing, the way Mo Shanqing gave him orders displeased him. Chapter 1239, Entering the Sect. Translator, Situlin Editor, Situlin. You were instructed to produce your blood, so why are you still in a daze? The thick-browed personal disciple said unhappily when he noticed that Yi Yun did not react to his instruction. Yi Yun glanced at him and knew his surname was Song. He was ranked the lowest among the 4 personal disciples. According to senior brother Ji, Song would only become an official disciple of Elder Taiching in a couple more days. Song was infuriated when he saw Yi Yun glance at him indifferently before ignoring him. As a personal disciple, he had always been placed on a pedestal and was accustomed to people looking at him with envy and respect. When had a candidate disciple ever shown him such contempt? Just as he was about to teach the punk who did not know better a lesson, senior brother Ji stopped him. "Junior brother Song, that's enough." With that said, senior brother Ji looked at Yi Yun. "Are you not willing to produce more blood?" Yi Yun said, "You all seem very interested in stirring the ascending dragon cauldron. However, I'm here to participate in a test, not to be an experimental subject." Yi Yun was acutely aware of Myriad God Ridge's goals. They were only using him as a lab rat so as to pursue their own fortunes. As for Yi Yun, he was only joining Myriad Godridge to come into contact with Old Snake. He did not want to attract too much attention. If he did cause a hubbub by repeatedly stirring the cauldron, his days in the Myriad Godridge would be anything but peaceful. Ian did not mind offending the Myriad Godridge because back when his blood stirred the cauldron, he saw from the corner of his eye that Old Snake had cast his gaze on him for a long time. As such, Ian was convinced that what he produced was sufficient enough to attract Old Snake's attention. However, Ian's words stupefied everyone present, especially those that had been racking their brains and trying every means at their disposal to enter the Myriad Godridge. All of those that wanted to join the Myriad Godridge acted with reverence and awe. They would show great respect to Myriad Godridge disciples whenever they saw them by offering bows or other forms of salute even if they were ordinary disciples, and even more for the personal disciples. Therefore, they found it ridiculous for Yun to speak to a personal disciple in such a manner. "This fellow is quite savage." A few youths in extravagant clothes were at a loss for words. Those 2 people that interacted with the old scammer both stirred the cauldron, and their actions only continued to get more impressive. Not only was Yi Yun's wisdom root impressive, even his attitude was impressive. He didn't show any respect to the Myriad Godridge's personal disciples or elder. Heh, what guts! However, it's not good for a young man to be overly arrogant. Even if you are extremely talented and the cream of the crop from where you come from, you will realize how puny you are when you walk out into the world and truly see it. There are too many geniuses in this world, many that far exceed your imagination, Mo Shanqing said in a drawn-out manner. He could tell that Yi Yun's foundations were a lot more robust than typical warriors of the same realm. He was likely a genius, and that gave him his arrogance. However, there were too many geniuses in Myriad Godridge. Many arrogant genius disciples would soon realize that they were just ordinary after entering the Myriad Godridge. Naturally, their pride would be ground off. Mo Shanqing felt that these people were simply engaging in childish tantrums, and did not mind it at all. "Produce your blood." "I'm not requesting your permission but ordering you." Mo Shanqing's voice turned colder. As a Myriad Godridge elder, how could he permit a newly recruited disciple to challenge his authority? How could a junior speak to him in such a tone? In Myriad Godridge's history, there had been a few disciples that had managed to pull out treasures from the ascending dragon cauldron. Didn't they always end up handing the treasures over to the Myriad Godridge without a fuss? Upon hearing Mo Shanqing's demands, Ian's brows knitted even tighter. Just as he was considering how to react, a deep Yuan Qi voice transmission rang in his ears. "Produce your blood." It's only a few drops of blood. You might not want to stay here, but I still want to. Don't you mess this up for me. Oh? Yi Yun's heart stirred as he turned to look at Old Snake. The old man had found a wall corner to sit down in. His clothes were a little tattered, to begin with. Now, as he sat there, drinking alcohol from a dirty-looking alcohol gourd while taking in the scene, he looked no different from a beggar. Yi Yun still chose to obey Old Snake. He trusted Huan Qinxue. With a sword beam, he cut his finger and a few drops of blood flew out into the sky. At the instant the blood passed through the clouds, Yi Yun sensed that a formless energy had suddenly penetrated the clouds. This strength had severed the connection he had with a few drops of blood. Ding ding ding. When the blood shot onto the ascending dragon cauldron, the drops let out collision sounds that resembled that of metal balls striking bronze. However, the ascending dragon cauldron did not move. It was not triggered by Yi Yun's blood. Yi Yun felt reverberations through his heart and mind. That energy from before. Yi Yun looked at Old Snake. Was it the old man? Old Snake continued drinking his alcohol as though it had nothing to do with him. Yi Yun remained puzzled. How did the old fellow instantly wipe out his imprint on the blood? It felt like the blood had changed to another person's. He failed? When Mo Shanqing saw no reaction from the ascending dragon cauldron, he secretly shook his head. Was it just a coincidence? It was somewhat odd that the ascending dragon cauldron did not shoot out any treasures. And now, with Yi Yun producing his blood again, it did not cause any changes to the ascending dragon cauldron. It left him extremely depressed. There went the credit he could have gotten. Mo Shanqing was disappointed, but junior brother Song was extremely delighted. He was truly afraid that Yi Yun would be able to stir the ascending dragon cauldron once again. If that happened, wouldn't Yi Yun soar high above him? To think this punk is shameless enough to act so arrogantly. He obediently produced his blood the moment Martial Uncle Mo spoke. Unfortunately, it was useless. He's a good-for-nothing, junior brother Song derided. He finally felt vindicated after Yi Yun shamed him with his retort. Martial Uncle Mo, it must have been a coincidence that the ascending dragon cauldron was stirred a moment ago. Perhaps it even has nothing to do with him. He, therefore, does not meet the qualifications and cannot be a disciple of our myriad Godridge. Senior brother Ji, head of the 4 personal disciples, spoke up. Momentarily, Mo Shanqing was placed in a dilemma. He had never encountered such a situation before. He was unsure how to evaluate Yi Yun either. However, the matter regarding the ascending dragon cauldron was of great importance. Despite knowing that the phenomena produced by the ascending dragon cauldron were likely a coincidence, Mo Shanqing did not wish to give up this opportunity. Upon having such a thought, Mo Shanqing lit up a special voice transmission charm to seek the sect master's decision. Yi Yun watched all of this nonchalantly. These people had made a mistake on one point. They believed that he was begging to join their myriad Godridge. In actuality, he had no intention of joining it. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the Yuan Qi voice transmission from before sounded again in his ear. Lad, don't be so rash. The myriad Godridge is quite an interesting place. Why do you think I'm staying in here? Upon hearing the voice, Yi Yun came to a halt. He glanced at Old Snake speechlessly. The old man seemed to be able to read his mind, being able to precisely guess what he was thinking every time. This left Yi Yun very displeased. The old fellow definitely knew that he was sent by Huan Qinxue, but he continued acting indifferently towards him. At that moment, there was a burst of flames. It was the voice transmission charm of the myriad Godridge's reply. Martial Uncle Mo, has this fellow been eliminated? Junior brother Song glanced at Yi Yun contemptibly as he spoke in a schadenfreudian manner. He especially hated disciples that entered the myriad Godridge based on the so-called wisdom route. They were not geniuses but had soared because of some random criterion. What gave them that right? He, Song Bowen, had to cultivate diligently and arduously in exchange for his present-day achievements. However, his blood had not resulted in any reaction from the ascending dragon cauldron. Was that fair? Who knew what sort of standards the useless ascending dragon cauldron had? Not only was Song Bowen unable to stir the cauldron, the other 3 personal disciples had failed as well. As such, they were all somewhat biased against Yi Yun and Snake Girl. However, at that moment, Mo Shanqing, who had heard the voice transmission charm's contents, lowered his head and gave an extended sigh. Finally, he looked up and glanced at Yi Yun oddly. He said reluctantly, "Kid, you are quite lucky. You have been made a personal disciple. My martial uncle, the sect master, is willing to take you in as his disciple." Chapter 1240, Main Peak. Translator, Citulin Editor, Citulin. What? Sect Master is willing to take him in as a disciple? Song Bowen was startled by Mo Shanqing's words. The other 3 personal disciples were also in a state of disbelief. The Myriad Godridge's sect master had not taken in any disciples for the last 1,000 years. Despite them all being personal disciples, there were differences in their status. For instance, Song Bowen's master was Elder Taiching, and the Myriad Godridge's sect master was the junior brother of Elder Taiching's master. As for Mo Shanqing, Myriad Godridge's sect master was the senior brother of his master. The differences between the titles of martial uncle were not generational but based on cultivation level. In Myriad Godridge, the accomplished reigned supreme. The higher the cultivation level, the higher one's status was. The highest was obviously the patriarch. However, it was rare to even hear about the patriarch, much less see him. Therefore, Myriad Godridge's sect master naturally became the person with the highest authority in Myriad Godridge. This punk was actually so lucky as to be designated the personal disciple of the sect master? Song Bowen found it unbelievable. What quality gave him that right? In fact, Mo Shanqing did not truly understand the matter. However, since the sect master had given the order, what else could he say? Instantly, the atmosphere turned rowdy. The title of personal disciple was enough to stir the crowd. These candidates were mainly from the various regions of the Calm Sea. All of them wanted to enter the Myriad Godridge to enjoy a meteoric rising. The entire Calm Sea spanned tens of millions of kilometers that contained innumerable countries of various sizes. And if one became a Myriad Godridge disciple, even if they were merely an outer disciple, it was enough for them to be made nobles in their own countries. If they became inner disciples, the status would be enough to make their country's emperor treat them with the utmost respect. As for core disciples or personal disciples, they were completely unimaginable. If they really employed their strength, they could easily wipe out an entire dynasty. The surroundings examinees started to voice their envy, making Mo Shanqing frown slightly. He glanced at Yi Yun and said, "It's your good luck and fortune that the sect master thinks so highly of you. However, a word of advice. It's useless to simply stir the ascending dragon cauldron. True geniuses depend on strength, not some so-called wisdom root." Mo Shanqing spoke coldly. In fact, he never understood the situation. If they were only interested in the treasures sealed in the ascending dragon cauldron, they could just invite the candidate with the treasure into the sect and trade the treasure for some reasonable benefits. Why did they make any candidate that was able to stir the ascending dragon cauldron a core or even personal disciple? Got it. Yi Yun answered Mo Shanqing's advice tersely. He had a rather bad impression of Mo Shanqing and so didn't bother to act cordially. Such an attitude naturally displeased Mo Shanqing. He stole a glance at Yi Yun before retreating into the pocket world within the stone gateway. The test continued. With about 7,000 to 8,000 participants, it would take about 2 days to finish. It was still early. The second batch of tests had already been prepared. As the candidates anxiously participated in the test, they watched enviously as Yi Yun and Snake Girl went to a test booth to retrieve the clothes and tokens issued to new recruits. "State your names," Ji bellowed at Yi Yun and Snake Girl. Yi Yun's mouth twitched. As an examinee, they had to engrave their names into the registration token after obtaining it. It could be clearly seen by anyone who scanned the token with their perceptions. He refused to believe that the personal disciples did not know his name. This manner of questioning was only meant to establish an imposing air. "Snake Girl." Snake Girl obediently reported her name. As for Yi Yun, he lazily waved the registration token in his hand without saying a word. His intention was clear: take a look for yourself. As he watched this happen, a few veins protruded from Song Bowen's forehead. "Junior sister Jean, bring them up the mountain." Ji surmised that if Song Bowen was to send the duo, they might come to blows midway. Therefore, he let his junior sister Jean, who had a warmer temperament, to lead the way. Yi Yun did not mind. When he was about to leave, he glanced at Old Snake and while cupping his fists, he said, "Senior, I would like to treat you to some drinks whenever you have the time." This was the second time Yi Yun said such a thing. Many people had mocked him for overestimating himself back when he offered to treat Old Snake to drinks after gaining entry to the sect. Now, as Yi Yun said the same thing a second time, they were left with more mixed emotions. Why did the entire test appear to be a game to Yi Yun? Yet, despite his nonchalance, he really entered the Myriad God Ridge and became a personal disciple of the highest standing. "Hee, I'll wait till you are settled in. I'll be at the Myriad God restaurant." "Remember to bring more money," Old Snake said with a chuckle. He lit up when alcohol was mentioned. When everyone heard that, their mouths twitched. Myriad God restaurant. The name made it obvious that it was run by the Myriad God Ridge. It was the most luxurious restaurant around the Myriad God Ridge. The food it served was usually cooked using natural treasures that were astronomical in price. It wasn't uncommon to pay a few thousand spirit jade for a single meal. If one were a little more extravagant, it would not be surprising for their bill to be 1 or 200,000 spirit jade. Old Snake had immediately chosen the Myriad God restaurant the moment he was being offered a treat. His shamelessness was truly unparalleled. "All right. See you at Myriad God restaurant in 5 days." Yi Yun agreed readily as a curve suffused his lips. This old fellow was finally willing to have a proper conversation with him. Yi Yun's mind was riddled with questions. One of them pertained to the ascending dragon cauldron. Yi Yun followed junior sister Jean and headed for the Myriad God Ridge's main peak. Junior sister Jean remained silent throughout the journey and led Yi Yun across 6 peaks and 5 mountain entrances before arriving at Myriad God Ridge's main peak. The mountain was tens of thousands of meters tall and its peak was covered in snow. However, amid the snow, there were large swaths of array formations that had exquisite jade trees and agar flowers that vied against each other for the right to be called the most beautiful. After walking past the restraints, Yi Yun sighed at Myriad God Ridge's wealth. The bricks and tiles were literally lined with jade and gold. The spring water was made of spiritual liquid and there were spirit beasts darting around the valuable vegetation that was everywhere. The mist lingered, making it feel like an immortal's paradise. "Junior sister Jean, are these 2 newly recruited disciples?" At that moment, a male disciple dressed in purple was standing above a gigantic hawk. He landed in front of Yi Yun and Snake Girl. "Yes. Senior brother Songwoo, one of them is a personal disciple recruited by Sect Master and the other will be a core disciple. I have brought this young man to pay Sect Master a visit." It was not easy to get a meeting with the Sect Master of Myriad God Ridge. However, Yi Yun was different. He was a disciple of the Sect Master and, according to the Myriad God Ridge's rules, newly recruited disciples had to first visit their masters. "What? Sect Master has taken in a disciple?" Songwoo looked at Yi Yun in disbelief after hearing the news. "He got recruited?" Songwoo pointed at Yi Yun, who smirked. He could not be bothered to deal with these people. He was only planning on entering the Myriad Godridge to find Old Snake, but he never expected to become the sect master's personal disciple. But so what if he was one? Why did everyone who saw him make a huge fuss about it as though they were mentally unsound? Yes, it's him. Might I trouble Senior Brother Song Wu to pass the news? I'm bringing him to meet Sect Master, Junior Sister Jean said while looking at Yi Yun unhappily. Chapter 1241, Sunken Moon Tower. Translator, Cetulin Editor, Cetulin. Alright, I'll inform the Sect Master. A white beam of divine light flew down from the main peak the moment Song Wu spoke. The person that came was a man that looked somewhat seductive. He had long brows and he had a beauty that was akin to a woman's. He was floating high in the air as he looked at Yi Yun and said, "My master, the sect master, is in seclusion. He just instructed me through a voice transmission to settle you in for now. If you encounter any cultivation problems, you can ask me too." My master, the sect master? Such a salutation clearly meant that the seductive man in front of him was a personal disciple of the Myriad Godridge's sect master. Typical personal disciples did not address the Myriad Godridge's sect master in such a manner. By calling him in such an endearing manner, it was enough to prove that his status was probably no lesser than Mo Shanqing. Follow me. With that said, the man led Yi Yun to a quiet residence. A 3-storied tower that looked exquisite stood in front of Yi Yun. Behind the tiny tower was a simple herb garden and connected to the tower was a cultivation chamber. In Myriad Godridge, many buildings were made of jade, but the tower Yi Yun was allocated was made of wood. Despite it being made of wood, Yi Yun knew that the construction material was nothing mortal jade could compare with. He was well versed in the divine alchemist's notes. He immediately identified the valuable wood used, sunken moon wood. Such wood grew in spirit springs and grew by absorbing the lunar essence. They grew a foot every millennium and could not be artificially grown. A tower built from sunken moon wood could be used to nourish the soul, bringing great benefits to cultivators. What extravagance! Yi Yun sighed. The tiny tower was only the residence of a personal disciple. If it were the sect master or an elder, it would probably be more lavish. Stay here for the next few days. My master will probably take another week before coming out of seclusion. He will naturally come to meet you when the time comes. Everything in this tower can be used by you as long as there are no restrictions protecting it. You won't be able to open those with restrictions anyway. You can go in now. The charming man gave a brief introduction before leaving. He left behind a few sets of personal disciple clothes, a token, and a jade slip that introduced the Myriad Godridge. The clothes worn by Myriad Godridge personal disciples were all purple in color and at the chest were embroidered the words, Myriad God. The outfit itself was an excellent enchanted artifact. Yi Yun flipped through the jade slip that contained the rules, and with his powerful perception, he finished reading it in seconds. The Myriad Godridge had many rules, but most of them were targeted at ordinary disciples. At the level of personal disciples, all rules lacked weight. Strength was what was most important. With strength, violating a few rules did not mean much. And correspondingly, personal disciples had all sorts of perks and advantages. These were things ordinary disciples lacked. As for the final personal disciple token, just producing it in the Myriad Godridge's territory could summon and order a king. If the king disobeyed, that would be an act of transgression against the Myriad Godridge. The king could be killed instantly and a new one established. Upon reading these, Yi Yun felt mixed emotions. He began to appreciate the reason why so many people wanted to enter the Myriad Godridge. This was the awe that power brought. An ordinary dynasty without the support of a major sect was like a mortal in front of the Myriad Godridge. It had no means to resist. Initially, Yi Yun joined the Myriad Godridge because of Old Snake, but after seeing the situation with the Myriad Godridge, he began to feel that it wasn't a bad choice staying in the area for a period of time. After all, this was his first foray into the sinkhole and he had nowhere else to go. There was a need for a conducive cultivation environment. Yi-Yun kept the token and jade slip before donning the purple outfit. He headed for the cultivation ground that was connected to the tower. There, Yi-Yun could sense the subtle nourishment the sunken moon would had on his soul. It made his mind especially calm and his pores were breathing the surrounding yuan qi in and out incessantly. Cultivating in such a place made for double the results with half the effort. When Yi-Yun used his personal disciple token to open the cultivation chamber's door, what greeted him was a simply adorned room. In it were a long bookshelf and a cultivation array formation. There were more than 100 spirit jade placed around the cultivation array. Yi-Yun noticed how the spirit jade was a lot better in quality than the one Snake Girl had produced. However, he did not know what grades they had. As for the bookshelf, it was filled with jade slips. Yi-Yun took out a few to read. Not only did they describe cultivation techniques, but they also introduced the sinkhole's major factions, natural treasures and the customs of the land. It was comprehensive. Yi-Yun slowly lost himself in reading. At that moment. Knock. 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 There was knocking at the door. Yi-Yun got up and opened the door. He saw a girl that looked about 15 standing gracefully erect by the door. She had a round face that exuded a healthy glow, resembling a flower waiting to bloom. You are? Yi-Yun asked curiously. The girl blushed and said slowly, I'm Zuoyan Xiaoyu. I passed the test a few days ago and entered the Myriad Godridge. I'm currently an Outer Sect disciple. An Outer Sect disciple? Yi-Yun was surprised. He knew that the Myriad Godridge had 3 kinds of entry tests. Other than the first test of stirring the cauldron, there were others who could pass the second nomological test and the third cultivation test for entry into the Myriad Godridge. However, these people would typically only be Outer Sect disciples. To become an Inner Sect or core disciple was just too difficult. However, what puzzled Yi-Yun was that his tower was an area where personal disciples lived. How did an Outer Sect disciple enter the area? Why are you here? Asked Yi-Yun. Zuoyan Xiaoyu's voice turned a lot softer. She said in embarrassment, all Outer Sect disciples have to do miscellaneous chores after entering the miscellaneous chores disciple. I have been designated as a maidservant of Sunken Moon Tower, which is also where you stay, young master. Yi-Yun was left in a daze as he turned to take a look. On the top of the tower he lived in was a plaque that wrote the words Sunken Moon Tower. From the looks of it, the towers in the core region of the Myriad Godridge were made of different materials and they were named after the materials used to construct the tower. Sunken Moon Tower wasn't a bad name. As for a maidservant, Yi-Yun rubbed his nose awkwardly. Perhaps, the people of Myriad Godridge were accustomed to their high standings, one that had people serving them, therefore, they did not think much of it. However, Yi-Yun truly was never one to be served, especially by such a delicate and sweet young lady. He found it awkward. About that. Don't you feel resentment being a maidservant to serve others despite entering the Myriad Godridge as a disciple? Yi-Yun could not help but ask. Resentment? Zuoyan Xiaoyu shook her head. How can it be? Young master, personal disciples like you are a lot higher in stature than Outer Sect disciples like me. Besides, being a maidservant of a personal disciple's residence is something vied for by others. It's much better than tending the spirit beasts, patrolling the mountain entrance or supervising the mining grounds. Giving the example of the Sunken Moon Tower that you live in, one can cultivate a lot faster in here. Young master, it's all thanks to you that I can even come here. If no one lives in Sunken Moon Tower, I would not be able to come here at any time. As Zuoyan Xiaoyu spoke, Yi-Yun noticed that the way she looked at him was one of idolation. This made him realize that he had thought too lightly of his status as a personal disciple. Being in the calm sea for the first time, he had not interacted with the customs of the land before becoming a myriad god-rich personal disciple. As he had become one so easily, he had not fully realized how much honor that was in his status. Although there were many experts in the sinkhole, it had even more mortals. The worship of strength here exceeded that of the 12 empyrean heavens. Under such circumstances, no one believed that serving a personal disciple was a loss of status. On the contrary, they did it with pride. Besides, they could also enjoy some of the benefits of a personal disciple, so it was naturally a job one yearned for. Then, how did you get this job? Yi Yun asked curiously. He noticed that other than the disciple attire Zuoyan Xiaoyu was wearing, nothing else on her was valuable. Clearly, she came from a humble background. I received this opportunity because my results were slightly better at the entrance test. Back then, numerous peers that entered with me were envious of me. Apparently, even the genius daughter of the Duanmu family, Duanmu Qingwen, had mustered all the powers of her family clan but failed to get this job. The Duanmu family? Yi Yun asked casually. Oh. It's a big family clan in the country I come from. As their patriarch is at the 7th floor Dao Palace realm, his status is even higher than that of an emperor. I see. Yi Yun nodded. To the myriad god-rich, a family clan with a patriarch at the 7th floor Dao Palace realm naturally did not amount to much. However, such family clans would probably enjoy a supernatural existence in the countries they resided in. They enjoyed endless riches, and the heiress of the family clan must have led a luxurious life. To be served by such a rich heiress would probably be uncomfortable. It was better off having someone like Zuoyan Xiaoyu who came from a humble background. Upon recognizing the situation, Yi Yun felt mixed emotions. The martial path was truly fraught with difficulties. If one wanted wealth, it was easily attainable. However, to become an unparalleled godly monarch, to live for tens to hundreds of millions of years, sharing the same age as the heavens and earth, that was just too difficult. By the way, Miss Zuoyan, why did you come to me? Zuoyan Xiaoyu hurriedly answered when she heard Yi Yun's question. Young master, do not call me that. I can't accept it. Young master, just call me Xiaoyu. I came here to tell you that it's time to eat. Eat? Yi Yun was taken aback. Why was there a need to inform him about eating? Furthermore, warriors could abstain from eating at a very low cultivation level. Apart from satisfying their taste buds, there was no need to eat. Just absorbing the spiritual energy from the heaven and earth would do. Zuoyan Xiaoyu said, that's right. The food given to myriad god-rich personal disciples is unlike any other. Such food is only provided once a month. You happen to be just in time. Zuoyan Xiaoyu gave an embarrassed smile after saying that. That's what I've heard. I've never seen it before. Chapter 1242, Meal. Translator, Situlin Editor, Situlin. Zuoyan Xiaoyu had only entered the myriad godrich a few days earlier than Yi Yun, but in that few days, she became quite well-versed in the myriad godrich's rules. She was also very familiar with the layout of the personal disciple region. She led Yi Yun all the way to the mess hall for personal disciples. The mess hall covered several kilometers and, upon entry, it looked to be a magnificent grand hall. In the middle of the hall were 17 heavy and robust bronze artifacts. There were ones with 3 legs and 2 handles called tripods, and ones with 2 handles and no feet that were cauldrons. There were a total of 9 tripods and 8 cauldrons that made for 17 bronze enchanted vessels. Such a number was the highest order used in meal etiquette since ancient times. Yi Yun could tell that the 17 vessels were not ordinary enchanted artifacts. Due to their placement, the surrounding laws seemed to naturally form a system unto itself. From the looks of it, the 17 bronze vessels were a complete set. Surrounding the vessels were 32 tables, prepared for the personal disciples. A table could only seat 2 and Yi Yun had shown up early. He sat down at a random table and Zuoyan Xiaoyu stood behind him. She studied her surroundings with an inquisitive look, for she found such a scene new and fascinating. Xiao Yu, you previously mentioned that this meal is only provided once a month and that it's extraordinary. In what way is it extraordinary? Young master, I heard that the monthly meal is cooked by Myriad God Ridge's elder Lanqin. She has a rather rare job in the Calm Sea. She's a cook, but you could also call her a herbal board master. In the Calm Sea, although there are few refinement masters, array masters, alchemists, desolate heaven masters, or talisman masters, there are still many people who learn such trades. But cooks have nearly gone extinct. The people that manage to master cooking are few and far between. Elder Lanqin's attainment in cooking is at the crest of perfection. If she used mortal ingredients, such as ordinary rice, vegetables or meat, it would still be superior grade tonic food. Not only would it taste excellent, it would also be extremely beneficial to one's body after consumption. If the meal is cooked using supreme grade ingredients, the effects are even more obvious. Elder Lanqin will be able to refine away the impurities contained within the ingredients during the cooking process. It results in no harm to the body no matter how much is eaten. This is something pills cannot compare with. As the saying goes, every medicine has its toxicity. It was inevitable for even superior grade pills to contain a little pill toxicity. If one ate too many, the toxins would accumulate and time would be needed to purge them. A well-cooked meal, however, would never result in such a situation. This was also the forte of a cook. However, as the effects from tonic food were less potent than pills, the number of people that studied the cooking of tonic food was even smaller. Young master, take a look. The 17 vessels placed in the middle of the hall are the enchanted artifacts that Elder Lanqin uses to cook. They are a set, and at this very moment, all the food is in them. In a while, I'll get some for you. There will be a total of 17 dishes, 9 meat and 8 vegetarian. Just as Zuoyan Xiaoyu was explaining the situation, people began streaming into the grand hall one after another. These people were also personal disciples and most of them had servants accompanying them. Some even had more than one servant. Yi Yun even saw a young man who was not dressed in personal disciple garb. Instead, he was wearing an embroidered robe commonly worn by rich scions. He was tended to by 4 women and all of them were gorgeous. 2 of them were tugging onto the man from each side, allowing him to wander his hands over them. Yi Yun was a little surprised by this. After all, this was in public. Such public displays of affection were rather preposterous. Coincidentally, this man happened to pick the table where Yi Yun was sitting. The man took a glance at Yi Yun and said with a laugh, "You must be the Yi Yun that stirred the cauldron." The man recognized all the personal disciples of Myriad Godridge, so, with the sudden appearance of an unfamiliar face, he immediately guessed at Yi Yun's identity. "That is me." Yi Yun nodded. After the man sat down, the table was filled with the pleasant chatter of women. This rendered Yi Yun somewhat speechless. Those who didn't know might even think he was here to fool around. The youth obviously noticed Yi Yun's gaze as he said with a laugh, "I'm Zhou Bingfang, and I have quite a number of maidservants and concubines. I applied for permission from the sect to have 4. The other 8 were brought from my family clan. The Myriad Godridge's rules allow personal disciples to bring in 8, and not 1 more." Yi Yun was rendered even more speechless by Zhou Bingfang's explanation. So he had only brought a third of them. 8 of them were left at his residence. He sure had good fortune in love. Junior brother Yi, as a personal disciple in Myriad Godridge, there's no need to be overly restrained. It's not a problem if you're a little ostentatious, as long as you have sufficient strength. Zhou Bingfang, whose personality screamed Casanova, beckoned for 2 of the beauties to sit down. They sat on each side of him and joined him in drinking. Yi Yun said to Zuoyan Xiaoyu, "You should sit down too." Zuoyan Xiaoyu's face blushed as she said hurriedly, "Young master, there's no need. I'll get you some food now." At that moment, the lids of the 17 vessels had been removed. A rich aroma of spirit food surged outwards, whetting one's appetite. The fragrance that overwhelmed Yi-Yun was something he had never experienced before. He could not help but be curious about Elder Lunchin's capabilities. The people in charge of presiding over the banquet were a few old men. They were not elders, only stewards. Zuoyan Xiaoyu walked to the first tripod and anxiously received the food from the old man tending to it. It was a spirit fruit the size of a bull. The flesh of the fruit had been removed and the fragrant food was placed in its core. Zuoyan Xiaoyu carefully held it in her bosom and felt the heat coming from it. She felt sensations going through her heart for, although she was not permitted to eat any of the food, it still excited her greatly. She glanced at Yi-Yun and brought Yi-Yun the spirit food like she was handing over a treasure. But at that moment, Zuoyan Xiaoyu suddenly felt like she was being tripped as she lost her balance. Zuoyan Xiaoyu let out a shocked cry. Although her cultivation level wasn't high, she was skilled enough to adjust her balance in midair. But this time, just as she was about to fall, she felt the surrounding laws undergo a change. Maintaining her balance became impossible. Pang! Zuoyan Xiaoyu fell straight onto the ground. The spirit fruit in her arms dropped to the ground as the food that was once inside it spilled all over. Zuoyan Xiaoyu sat on the ground in a daze. She looked at the food that was splattered onto the ground as tears began to brim in her eyes. She naturally knew the value of the food she was carrying. Perhaps, all the cultivation resources she had ever used throughout her life was not even as expensive as the spirit fruit. Yet, it was now splattered across the ground by her own hands. Besides being an outer sect disciple that worked as a maidservant, she was also one of the least powerful members of her family. As such, she learned to be extremely careful in the residences of personal disciples at all times, always afraid that trouble would befall her randomly. But now, she was in big trouble. Chapter 1243, Humans Shouldn't Eat Pigs Will. Translator, Situlin Editor, Situlin. Young Master. Zuoyan Xiaoyu looked at Yi-Yun with watery eyes filled with grievance. This was the first day she was serving Yi-Yun, but she had already made a mistake. Furthermore, it was on such an occasion. It's fine. Yi-Yun stood up and helped Zuoyan Xiaoyu up. He looked at a girl dressed in maidservant garb nearby. He knew very well that the maidservant had tripped Zuoyan Xiaoyu. It appeared unintentional, but the trip managed to make Zuoyan Xiaoyu lose her balance. Following that, someone had changed the spatial dimension laws, causing Zuoyan Xiaoyu to fall to the ground. Upon noticing Yi-Yun's gaze, the maidservant felt a little apprehensive. However, one look at her master emboldened her. She explained, it wasn't intentional. She was walking over and happened to slam into my foot. Yi-Yun's gaze fluttered to a lanky youth behind the maidservant. He was holding a cup of wine with eyes narrowed. He appeared listless, but Yi-Yun knew that he was the one who used laws to prevent Zuoyan Xiaoyu from maintaining her balance. Yi-Yun looked at a few stewards in the room. All of them remained composed, as though they had not noticed everything that had just happened. Yi-Yun sneered inwardly. There were many people that let things happen if they were not personally affected. When it came to these slippery people, personal disciples were not to be offended. The best action to take was to feign ignorance. Upon sensing Yi-Yun's gaze, the lanky youth met it, his slit-like eyes filled with derision. Do you have a grudge against me? Yi-Yun asked as the lanky youth sneered. He did not answer, as though it was beneath him to even speak to Yi-Yun. At that moment, a laughter came from outside. Ha ha ha, is that junior brother Yi? How is it? Are you accustomed to living in the Myriad God Ridge? Yi-Yun turned around and saw 4 personal disciples appear at the entrance one after another. They were the ones who previously oversaw the entrance test. And the person who spoke was the youth with thick brows, Song Bowen. We finally rushed here for the banquet after administering the test until sundown. It sure wasn't easy on us. Song Bowen stretched his arms as though he was exhausted. Behind him, Ji and junior sister Jing did not speak. They only glanced at Yi Yun. They had all seen the conflict that had just happened. The quartet took their seats as Ji sat with the last disciple out of the four. As for junior sister Jing, she sat beside a girl. The remaining Song Bowen sat beside the listless lanky youth. With Song Bowen taking his seat, the lanky youth's maidservant automatically helped Song Bowen to a plate of food. Yi Yun realized the situation with the scene unfolding. Song Bowen and the lanky youth clearly had a great relationship. They had probably discussed this beforehand. Junior brother Yi, it seems you have attracted the misfortune of staying in Sunken Moon Tower. Beside Yi Yun, Zhou Bingfeng chuckled through a voice transmission while hugging a charming beauty. Why do you say so? Yi Yun asked indifferently. He seemed particularly unfazed, as though the food that spilled had nothing to do with him. Junior brother Yi, you might not be aware that even the residences of the personal disciples are stratified. Sunken Moon Tower is one of the better places to be. By being the sect master's disciple that stays in Sunken Moon Tower, it is only natural to be targeted. Oh? Yi Yun did not know that Sunken Moon Tower was in such demand. In that case, his treatment was to be expected. In these people's minds, he had stirred the ascending dragon cauldron due to his wisdom root. He was only lucky to become a personal disciple, he didn't earn it by his own merit. As such, how could they be convinced of his tenure? Adding in the conflicts he had with Song Bowen during the test, and it was easy to explain everything that was happening. And at that moment, Song Bowen feigned surprise as he looked at the food that had splattered on the ground. What's going on? The lanky youth beside him lifted his eyelids and languidly said, nothing much. Some maidservant was clumsy and spilled food all over. What sort of maidservant is she? Cutting off her limbs would not be enough to compensate such expensive food. This kind of servant that's as stupid as a pig should be sent away immediately, or at least she would if I had any say. She can't even deliver a meal properly, so why even bother practicing martial arts? What a joke! Song Bowen said sarcastically. As a young lady, how could Zuoyan Xiaoyu react to such nasty derision? She froze with a flushed face as tears began streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't able to say a word. Xiaoyu, come back, Yi Yun said. He knew that Song Bowen's words were truly directed at him, a strike at him by reviling others. Young master, I. As Zuoyan Xiaoyu sobbed, she felt aggrieved, but, before she could say a word, Yi Yun had sat her down. Just have a seat, Yi Yun said. Although he had only been acquainted with Zuoyan Xiaoyu for less than a day, Yi Yun knew that it was not easy for a girl with a humble background like her to work diligently at climbing up the martial path. Yi Yun could not just sit idly by as she was being bullied, reprimanded, and insulted because of him. Oh? So it's junior brother Yi's maidservant that spilled the food. Look at me shooting off my mouth. I should have held back. I'm sorry. However, the food in these 17 vessels was cooked by Martial Ant Lanqin. The 17 dishes are a set, and the effects are greatly reduced if any dish is missed out on. Why don't you get that clumsy maidservant of yours to pick the food up off the floor? The ground is swept perfectly clean here, so the food isn't dirty. Besides, so what if it's a little dirty, right? The personal disciples sitting near Song Bowen burst out into a rapturous roar of laughter when they heard his words. They had good relationships with him, so they naturally backed him. Junior brother Song, how can you say that? If you pick up food that's spilled, wouldn't that make it pig's will? How can junior brother eat pig's will? That's right. Junior brother Song, you need to mind your language. All of you are right. Against the crowd's mockery, Yi Yun was not angered at all. Instead, he nodded calmly. It's true that humans shouldn't eat pig's will. When Yi Yun said those words without rhyme or reason, it left people somewhat baffled. At that moment, Yi Yun suddenly waved his hand as a dazzling black beam suddenly burst out from his palm. Phew! The black beam was as fast as lightning and, instantly, it reached Song Bowen. Song Bowen was alarmed. He never expected Yun to suddenly take action. An attack at such a blazing speed left him no time to react. He retreated hastily, but at that moment, the ice-cold killing intent from the black beam seemed to shatter the surrounding space, causing it to collapse down on him like a massive mountain. Ha! Song Bowen bellowed angrily as he forcefully pushed out his palms, forming a wall of light. At the same time, the lanky youth next to Song Bowen took action as well. Song Bowen was his junior brother, so how could he sit idle? In a split second, he produced a curved blade from his interspatial ring and slashed down. Boom! With an explosion, the black beam had slammed into Song Bowen's light barrier. A black flame burst forth as the light barrier was burned through. The inferno did not abate as its flames coursed along Song Bowen's Yuan Qi and reached his arms. What sort of fire was this? Song Bowen's expression was ashen. He had never encountered such a flame before. After all, it was impossible for him to recognize the heretical godfire seed. The flames burned and consumed everything. Song Bowen felt the surrounding Yuan Qi twisters howling and pressure coming from the rupturing space. It made his dantian feel like it would explode. His heart could hardly beat. Pang! The contorting flames struck Song Bowen heavily in the chest and engulfed his flesh and burning his meridians. Song Bowen grunted as he spat out a mouthful of blood before hurtling backward. And at that moment, the lanky youth's curved blade came cleaving down a little too late. Song Bowen had already succumbed to heavy injuries as he flew backward. So when his blade slashed into an empty void, it left an extremely ugly expression on the lanky youth's face. Were there spatial dimension laws? The lanky youth was appalled. He believed that he could save Song Bowen in time, but when he struck out, the flow of time seemed to dramatically slow. Besides, he never expected that in an instant, Song Bowen would be injured in such a manner. And at that moment, Song Bowen, still flying backwards, came to a sudden halt in midair when Yun tapped his finger. Following that, Yun casually waved his hand and placed it back on the table. Just this action alone caused Song Bowen to be forcefully pulled back. As if an invisible rope connected Yun's palm to Song Bowen's head, Song Bowen crashed heavily in the middle of the hall when Yun placed his palm down. Pang! Song Bowen fell head first and his nose smashed into the ground. Oddly enough, he fell right onto the pile of food that had splattered to the ground. His face and mouth were completely filled with food. His chest and everything under was burnt to a crisp and he looked as pathetic as could be. At that moment, Yun said slowly, "I was commending you on your logic a moment ago. Humans shouldn't eat pig's will. So why did you gorge on it without any regard? And from the looks of it, you seem to enjoy it?" When Yun said those words, silence befell the hall. From the start, Yun's intention was to beat Song Bowen soundly and throw him onto the pile of food. From beginning to the end, Song Bowen was like a tiny chick that was helpless against him. This was an unexpected outcome. Although Song Bowen had yet to be promoted to personal disciple, his strength was not to be doubted. Otherwise, he would not have been thought highly of by Elder Tai Ching. Yet he was completely incomparable with Yun. Yun had just entered the Myriad God Ridge and his entry was only because he had stirred the ascending dragon cauldron. How was he so strong despite not being a proper personal disciple? Sitting beside Yun, Zhou Bingfeng could not help but clap his hands. Impressive! Impressive! I thought Junior Brothery would suffer today, but I never expected you to be this strong. Is your cultivation level really only at the 4th floor Dao Palace? Chapter 1244, Tolerance Extraordinaire. Translator, Citulin Editor, Citulin. Yun's cultivation level could be seen at a glance. It was also easy to see that Yun had a robust foundation, but his nomological insights and the strength of his techniques were naturally less conspicuous. As for Myriad God Ridge's personal disciples, they were proud people. The myriad Godrich spent large amounts of resources to nurture them, so they found it unbelievable that they would be inferior to a new disciple. Junior brother Song, are you all right? With a flash, the lanky youth appeared beside Song Bowen. When he inspected Song Bowen's injuries, his expression turned ashen. Song Bowen's dantian and meridians had suffered grievous burns. Although Song Bowen's cultivation was unaffected, he would definitely be bedridden for a month. You suddenly launched a ruthless sneak attack while he wasn't prepared. You have openly violated the sect rules. What insolence! The lanky youth said sternly. According to the myriad Godrich's rules, disciples were not allowed to suddenly attack another. If there was any strife between them, both parties could make arrangements to fight it out at Myriad God platform. The loser would then compensate the other party as per the arrangement. Once fights reached the Myriad God platform, it would be a world-shaking battle. Although the sect rules prohibited killing, no one held back as the compensation would usually be quite a substantial amount. If one did accidentally kill the other, it was something that could not be helped. After all, blades did not discriminate. Therefore, even if there was a conflict between disciples, they would not be too quick to head for Myriad God platform. For Yi Yun to suddenly attack, causing severe injuries in the process, was a punishable offense. He. Yi Yun sneered. It's clear who exactly started this conflict. Don't you try to use the sect rules on me. If you resent anything, we can always go to Myriad God platform and agree to an amount of compensation. I'll be glad to entertain you. You? The lanky youth's voice stagnated and had nothing to return verbally. Although he said that Yi Yun had garnered victory through a sneak attack, he was acutely aware that, even if Yi Yun had attacked openly, he was much stronger than Song Bowen. It was even highly probable that he had not used all his strength. He lacked confidence in how he stacked up to Yi Yun, so how could he risk settling the dispute at Myriad God platform? Are you trying to provoke me to the Myriad God platform? Do you think I'm afraid of you? Although the lanky youth lacked the courage to follow through, his speech remained adamant. He had already been a personal disciple for 2 decades. His strength was far greater than Song Bowen, who was only recently promoted to personal disciple. He silently stared at Yi Yun as though he was trying to decipher Yi Yun's true strength. And at that moment, Yi Yun said to Zuoyan Xiaoyu, since the food has been spilled, go get me some more. Ah! Xiaoyu suddenly jolted out of her daze when she heard Yi Yun's words. Yi Yun had defeated Song Bowen like a sudden clap of thunder, one that left no time to cover one's ears. She had seen all of it and never expected that the young master she served was so powerful. Young master. About the food. Zuoyan Xiaoyu was a little taken aback. She had already spilled the food, so where was she to get another serving? A person was only allowed 1 serving of Elder Lanqin's food. Just as she was about to say something, she saw Yi Yun point at Song Bowen's table. His finger was directed at Song Bowen's food. Was he asking her to take away Song Bowen's food? Seeing the lanky youth sitting at the table with such a sullen expression, Zuoyan Xiaoyu felt extremely apprehensive. She hesitated for a moment before gritting her teeth to walk towards the table. Although she was afraid of the lanky youth, she knew that Yi Yun's assault was partly on her behalf. In that case, how could she undermine Yi Yun? Compared to Yi Yun's brutal assault, all she was doing was taking a serving of food. When she walked in front of Song Bowen's table, Zuoyan Xiaoyu saw the maidservant that had tripped her. She was standing behind the lanky youth and staring at her angrily. Personal disciples had their conflicts, while maidservants shared their own strifes. Zuoyan Xiaoyu's strength may have been lacking, but it was impossible for her to lose to the other party's maidservant. She grabbed Song Bowen's food. And at that moment, Yi Yun spoke again. Take both shares. What? The atmosphere in the mess hall completely froze the moment Yi Yun said those words. The lanky youth's eyes flashed coldly. He had to turn a blind eye to Song Bowen's food being taken, but to even take his away was preposterous. Punk! You're going too far. So what if I am? I'm not one to suffer in silence. You previously instigated your maidservant to trip Xiaoyu, spilling my food. It's only right and proper that I make you compensate me. Even if this reaches the table of elders, I will not be faulted. If you want to keep that meal of yours, go ahead. If you agree to fight me at Myriad God platform in 3 days, you can keep the food. Yi Yun said this indifferently, but his words left everyone present speechless. What was overbearing? This was it. Although the lanky youth never took a hit from Yi Yun, his outcome was worse than being hit. Yi Yun was quickly forming a mental demon in him. If he agreed to face Yi Yun at Myriad God platform, he would likely be outmatched. If that time came, he would end up being severely injured and also allow Yi Yun to profit from him. However, if he were to reject the notion and allow a mere maidservant take away his food, how was he to face others in the future? How dare you? The lanky youth looked at Zuoyan Xiaoyu as though he could kill her with his gaze. Zuoyan Xiaoyu felt her body tighten as she was stifled by the lanky youth's glare. But at that moment, Zuoyan Xiaoyu felt a soft aura permeate her body. She immediately felt her body lighten and the pressure dissipated. Zuoyan Xiaoyu turned to glance at Yi Yun. She knew that he was protecting her with his aura. This left Zuoyan Xiaoyu with an odd sense of safety. She was of humble birth and had never experienced the feeling of having a powerful backer supporting her. She felt emboldened, even if she faced an enemy that was usually insurmountable. Gritting her teeth, Zuoyan Xiaoyu extended her arms and took the food in front of the lanky youth. The lanky youth's eyes flared with killing intent while, at that moment, Yi Yun pressed down on his interspatial ring. Are you intending to fight me now instead of waiting for the Myriad God platform? Yi Yun's voice seemed to come from another abyss. It sent a chill down everyone's backs. In Myriad God Ridge, the so-called rules were used to restrain the weak. The stronger one was, the lesser the punishments were for violating the rules. Besides, it was the lanky youth and Song Bowen that had started the conflict. Yi Yun already stood on the side of reason. There was no doubt in people's minds that Yi Yun would truly take action the moment the lanky youth moved. In fact, Yi Yun ordered Zuoyan Xiaoyu to take the food because he was certain he could severely injure the lanky youth before he could even lay a hand on her. At that moment, time seemed to come to a pause. People watched as Zuoyan Xiaoyu's tiny hands lightly grabbed the lanky youth's spirit fruit. Everyone fell silent. No personal disciple stood forward. The stewards let the matter play out as it did not affect them. The lanky youth's expression reached an unprecedented ugliness. He wanted to strike the handmaid in front of him to death, but it would not restore his reputation. He knew very well that if he truly did so, he was giving Yi Yun a reason to ruthlessly beat him up. In the end, the conflict would reach Myriad God platform and things would only get worse. And if he acted first, killing the maidservant in front of him, Yi Yun would not even suffer any punishments from the sect rules. In the end, all the lanky youth could do was watch helplessly as Zuoyan Xiaoyu took away his food. He tolerated it. He actually tolerated it. What do you know? The accomplished are always tolerants extraordinaires. Some people laughed with derision. Among the many personal disciples present, there were many that did not see eye to eye with the lanky youth. Some could not help but crack wise. And hearing their jeers only made the lanky youth feel like dying. He had never been so embarrassed in his life. Chapter 1245, Green Spirit Jade Fragment. Translator, Situlin Editor, Situlin. Zuoyan Xiaoyu placed the fruit in front of Yi Yun. The first dish prepared by Elder Lanqin was made from green spirit fruit. It had a naturally refreshing fragrance, and the rice that was stuffed into the fruit was jade pearl rice. Golden threaded dates adorned it, allowing every grain of rice to suffuse a light green color. The crystalline grains, when piled together, looked like jade fragments. Just taking in the fragrance was intoxicating, and was enough to wipe away any physical exhaustion. Great food, it really is appetizing. Yi-Yun had never eaten such food before. He had participated in several banquets held by important figures, allowing him to sample all sorts of precious delicacies, but none of them could match the green spirit fruit rice in front of him. Indeed, the sinkhole was unique. As a large sect of the calm sea, the myriad Godridge's deep heritage was not to be doubted. Most of the time, strength was displayed in ways other than wars or territorial disputes. Just the quality of basic necessities of life was enough to tell the difference. Apart from the food, the myriad Godridge had lodging like the sunken moon tower. Even the simple outfits worn by personal disciples were superior-grade enchanted clothes. Nothing could be faulted. At that moment, Zhou Bingfeng said with a smile, "Brothery, just being able to eat a bit of Elder Lanqin's food is a great blessing. There's never enough for me. Besides, the food in these 9 tripods and 8 cauldrons form a natural set. They respectively nourish 17 laws. This first rice dish is called Green Spirit Jade Fragment. It gathers rich wood elemental yuan qi, and the green spirit fruit's essence has long been absorbed by the rice. Enjoy your meal." As Zhou Bingfeng spoke, he began wolfing down his food. Zhou Bingfeng was clearly someone with much life experience, but his table manners were in no way elegant. He chomped down on the green spirit jade fragment, filling his mouth with rice fragrance. Yi-Yun ate 2 sets himself and enjoyed it all the more. Not only was the jade pearl rice gratifying, its texture was excellent. It was soft and did not lose its bounce. In a few mouthfuls, he had finished a quarter of the rice within the fruit. However, Yi-Yun noticed that Zuoyan Xiaoyu was sitting beside him with her head lowered. She looked very obedient. With a thought, he pushed the other serving of green spirit jade fragment in front of Zuoyan Xiaoyu and said, "There's another serving. Take it." "Ah." Zuoyan Xiaoyu hurriedly shook her head. "I couldn't. This is food prepared especially for personal disciples. How can a maidservant like me eat it?" Just being allowed to sit meant that a maidservant was given extremely high preferential treatment, much less eating the food in the mess hall. "It's fine. There are 2 servings anyway." As Yi-Yun spoke, he pointed to the middle of the hall. Song Bowen had suffered such grievous injuries that he was still unconscious. The stewards that presided over the meal began doing their jobs. They sought out people to send Song Bowen for healing and, as such, he naturally would miss his meal. Thus, Yi-Yun made it a point to not stand on ceremony by taking Song Bowen's meal for his own. There was no reason to refuse such delicious food that was also greatly beneficial to one's cultivation. "But, young master, I really can't eat it." Zuoyan Xiaoyu was adamant. She felt her lowly status did not afford her the pleasure of the expensive food. "Then, get a small bowl and have some. If you just keep watching me eat, I'll feel uneasy." Yi-Yun was not accustomed to having people serving him while eating. He found it awkward if a maidservant was watching him while he had his meals. After failing to decline the offer, Zuoyan Xiaoyu got a tiny bowl and used a ladle to scoop a portion of rice into her bowl, and absolutely refused anything else. As she looked at the tiny bit of rice in her tiny bowl, Zuoyan Xiaoyu felt conflicted. She was acutely aware how inferior the status of outer sect disciples was in the myriad Godridge. She felt blissful enough to be a maidservant of a personal disciple, but was even more happy to be able to serve Yi-Yun. Under the light, the crystalline pearl rice twinkled like perfect pieces of art. She could not bring herself to eat it and could even sense that the maidservants close by, especially the girl that had tripped her, were casting envious stares at her. Zuoyan Xiaoyu opened her tiny mouth and carefully ate a mouthful of rice. The fragrance filled her mouth as she slowly chewed and held the food in her mouth, before swallowing it unwillingly. But even so, the rice had already transformed into pure yuan qi that infused into her body while in her mouth. It nourished her dantian. Zuoyan Xiaoyu clearly felt her cultivation level, that had recently been on a plateau, beginning to subtly increase. The effects of such spirit food were more intense for cultivators at lower cultivation levels. If warriors with low cultivation levels consumed very enriching pills, their bodies might not be able to withstand the energy of the pills. The warrior could very well end up exploding to their deaths. However, food would not result in such a situation. Go get the second dish. Take 2 servings. Yi-Yun said after wiping his mouth. He had eaten nearly 2 servings of green spirit jade fragment and felt his appetite being whet. Yeah. Zhuo Yanxiaoyu nodded and walked to a bronze cauldron and took the second dish. She felt a little apprehensive as she approached the steward in charge of dispensing the food, afraid of asking for 2 servings, but she never expected the steward to just hand over 2 servings without her request. There was tacit consent over the situation. This imbued Zhuo Yanxiaoyu with the realization that the Myriad Godrage was a sect that valued strength. Here, strength was the absolute greatest rule. For one person to eat 2 servings, and even let his personal maidservant have some? What arrogance! Senior brother Ji, are you going to watch idly? Among the personal disciples, someone said this to Ji Changsheng. They were all personal disciples, but the differences in status and strength were immense as well. Ji Changsheng had been a personal disciple for more than 3 centuries. Song Bowen was naturally incomparable to him. This was why he could run the entrance test and help Mo Shanqing preside over the ascending dragon cauldron. So what if I do? Junior brother Song was at fault in today's conflict. Without recognizing his strength, he wantonly provoked Yi-Yun and ended up being taught a lesson. Who else is to blame but himself? However, this Yi-Yun was ruthless in his retaliation. His personality is downright repugnant. Although the Myriad Godrage values strength, there are numerous people stronger than Yi-Yun. When he does encounter someone stronger, the one suffering will be him, Ji Changsheng said indifferently as he continued eating. Although Yi-Yun could not hear Ji Changsheng's conversation, his gaze had inadvertently swept past Ji Changsheng. Yi-Yun felt that Ji Changsheng gave others a deep and unfathomable impression. Xiaoyu, have more. When Yi-Yun saw that Zhuo Yanxiaoyu would only eat a tiny mouthful of each dish before refusing to eat further, he gave her a huge scoop that filled most of her bowl. Young master. Zhuo Yanxiaoyu was overwhelmed by the favor, but with the food in her bowl, she could not decline it. Eat it. It's Song Bowen's anyway. It will be a waste if you do not eat it. Besides, I can sense that the cultivation benefits you will receive from eating this food will be much better than mine. It seems like you are about to make a breakthrough. Yi-Yun enjoyed the meal, for it had been years since he had such a feast. Previously, when he was in the Myriad Divine Territory, Yi-Yun had entered seclusion for 25 years and practically did not eat or drink. When he went to the Mirage Sea realm, he stayed there for a few years and led an idyllic life with Huan Shenxue. She was a woman that lived like a saint. She would often eat spirit flowers and drink morning dew. Although the diet was elegant, it was definitely not delicious from Yi-Yun's point of view. How could it compare with the delicacies prepared meticulously by a herbal board master? Yi-Yun felt that he could stay in Myriad Godrage just for the monthly feast alone. That night, after having his fill, Yi-Yun began secluded meditation. After eating the 17 dishes, Yi-Yun felt that the yuan qi in his body was gathering together. Although it was not intense, it seemed never-ending and he felt like he was almost about to break through. In fact, Yi-Yun had cultivated in the Mirage Sea realm for a few years and his cultivation level was extremely close to the 5th floor Dao Palace. Now he was on the brink of a breakthrough, but it was not solely because of the meal. Even if he had not eaten it, he would have naturally broken through a few months later. What the meal did was save him some time. And, of course, Sunken Moon Tower was very suitable for seclusion. As such, Yi-Yun entered seclusion for 3 days. During this time, Zhuo Yanxiaoyu stood guard in Sunken Moon Tower's yard. As she guarded Yi-Yun, she cultivated as well. There were large amounts of yuan qi gathered by the arrays there, and with the sunken moon wood nourishing her soul, it became a lot easier for Zhuo Yanxiaoyu to cultivate. She took 2 days to absorb most of the yuan qi given by the 17 dishes. As she had a low cultivation level, her breakthrough came earlier than Yi Yun's. Her cultivation level had reached the perfected yuan opening realm. This cultivation level was not bad for her age. However, there was still the Heaven Ascension realm and Dao Manifestation realm separating her from Yi Yun's Dao Palace realm. Even so, Zhuo Yanxiaoyu was very delighted. She speculated that if she had not entered the Myriad God Ridge, it would have taken another 3 years for her Dao seed to grow into a Dao tree, allowing her to officially enter the Heaven Ascension realm. The time she would take to enter the Heaven Ascension realm had been shortened to a few months. She was eager for Yi Yun to come out of seclusion so that she could flaunt her cultivation results. Although Zhuo Yanxiaoyu knew that her accomplishments meant nothing, she felt that simply gaining an approving nod from Yi Yun would leave her drowning in happiness. Just as Zhuo Yanxiaoyu was anticipating that moment, there was a knock on the door. Zhuo Yanxiaoyu opened the door and saw 4 people standing on the other side. They were dressed in Myriad God Ridge steward garb and they were expressionless. They executed their job without any personal considerations. "Are you outer sect disciples Zhuo Yanxiaoyu?" The man leading the group asked Zhuo Yanxiaoyu coldly. His voice did not exude any emotions. "That is me." Zhuo Yanxiaoyu was taken aback. From the person's attire, he was likely in charge of the Myriad God Ridge's miscellaneous chores department. "All right. Your job has been changed. From now on, you do not need to continue being a maidservant for Sunken Moon Tower. Follow me, we will arrange a new job for you." Ah! Zhuo Yanxiaoyu's breathing stagnated. She once believed that entering Myriad God Ridge and becoming Yi Yun's maidservant was the luckiest and happiest thing to ever happen to her. But was this bliss only meant to last less than 3 days before turning into evanescent bubbles? Chapter 1246, Newcomer. Translator, Citulin Editor, Citulin. What are you waiting for? Quickly pack your things. The steward impatiently said this when he saw Zhuo Yanxiaoyu in a daze. She was an outer sect disciple, and as such her job was determined by the miscellaneous chores department. Their orders were like a royal decree to her, so how could she refuse them? To put it into perspective, outer sect disciples were ranked lowest on the totem pole. They were too insignificant. Zhuo Yanxiaoyu bit her lip and accepted that indeed, with her status, she was not fated to serve Yi Yun, a powerful personal disciple who treated her well. She smiled bitterly and said, "I'll leave with you," but when young Master Yi started his seclusion, I stood in this spot to wait for him. At the moment, I still serve young Master Yi in Sunken Moon Tower, so if I am to leave, I must wait for him to come out of seclusion to inform him that I'm leaving. The seclusion grounds in Sunken Moon Tower had its own array formation. Once it was activated, any information from outside could be transmitted in. Unfortunately, warriors would sever their perception while in seclusion. They needed to be oblivious to everything that was happening around them, or they would not be able to focus their mind on breaking through. It was for this reason that warriors would seek expert guardians to protect them while they cultivated. Under the current circumstances, Yi Yun would not be able to detect that Zhuo Yanxiaoyu was leaving. Therefore, as his maidservant, she felt that she should not leave without a word. However, the head steward became impatient when he heard Zhuo Yanxiaoyu's words. He snorted coldly and said, "Who do you think you are? You are only a servant that usually serves tea and massages. The best you can hope for is to catch the eye of someone and become a concubine. If not, you will be forever a maidservant. Do you really think you are that important to a personal disciple? Bidding farewell? Quick, leave with us." The person who spoke was a dark-skinned steward. He looked like a mortal in his 40s. Zhuo Yanxiaoyu was a mere outer sect disciple and was unable to put up any resistance. She gave the tightly shut door to the cultivation chamber a meaningful and longing glance before leaving with the dark-skinned steward. A day later, in the cultivation chamber, a gray flame whirled around in mid-air. Amid the flowing flames was a gentle seven-colored light, and within it, one could vaguely make out a sleeping girl's face. That girl was none other than Ling Xier. Ever since she awoke, she became fused with the heretical god fire seed. Now, while she slept, Yi Yin could sense that Ling Xier's soul power was constantly increasing. He guessed that when Ling Xier's soul power reached a certain apex, she would undergo a new metamorphosis. It was unknown what Ling Xier and the heretical god fire seed would evolve into. My cultivation level has finally broken through to the 5th floor Dao Palace realm. It's time to leave. Yi Yin took a deep breath as the surrounding black flames and pure yuan qi rushed into his body as though he was a whale intaking water. Yi Yin opened the array and walked out of the cultivation grounds. It was already night and there were orange-yellow lights lit in Sunken Moon Tower. There was a faint tea fragrance in the air that left Yi Yin feeling refreshed. Yi Yin suddenly felt that a maidservant taking care of his daily tasks was quite a nice thing to have. In the past, he had been alone for too long and began to feel somewhat lonely. Yi Yin pushed open Sunken Moon Tower's door and walked into the room, where he saw tea already prepared on the table. There were 2 plates of intricate desserts sitting beside the tea. These desserts were another thing that the Myriad Godridge gave solely to its personal disciples. Typical disciples had no chance of enjoying such perks. A few of the desserts had been painstakingly chosen, with different colors and shapes placed together in an elegant and harmonious arrangement. And on the table was a bronze heating stove. Hot air effused from it, maintaining the dessert's warmness and soft texture. Yi Yin knew that Xiaoyu had no way of knowing exactly when he would finish his seclusion. As such, she must have freshly prepared all of this every day. She was quite thoughtful. Just as he was thinking over the matter, he heard the maidservant room's door open from upstairs. A girl in a red dress stood by the door with an elegant posture. She was beautiful with her white skin effusing a healthy glow, making her look very endearing. However, she was not Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Yi Yin was taken aback. A girl had suddenly appeared in his Sunken Moon Tower and was living in the room on the 2nd floor. This left him a little bewildered. "Who are you?" asked Yi Yin. The girl gave Yi Yin a poised bow and beamed. She said, "My name is Duanmu Qingwen, an outer sect disciple that entered the Myriad Godridge 7 days ago. I was formerly tending the herbs in the southeastern herbal gardens. Yesterday, people from the miscellaneous chores department instructed me to serve you, young Master Yi. Young Master, you have been in seclusion for 4 days, am I right? You must be tired. I have made some misty flower tea for you and have lit a stove of sunken water fragrance. Young Master, I wonder if you like to drink alcohol. If you do, I'll warm a pot. You can take a bath first and drink while soaking in it." The red-dressed girl said all this as she arrived on the 1st floor like a gust of wind. She even pulled open the door to the bathroom on the 1st floor. The bathroom in Sunken Moon Tower was extremely spacious. The bathing pool was made of superior suet jade and it was filled with water. There were flower petals of every color scattered across the water surface. Thick steam effused from it, blurring out the entire area. Just one look at it made one feel comfortable. I have filled the pool with Myriad Godridge's main peak's 10,000-year-old melted ice water. It has just been heated up and I have scattered petals from the 5-colored flower. It has quite a refreshing effect. Young Master, are you satisfied with this? If you are, let me help you into the bath. As Duanmu Qingwen spoke, she picked up the tray of tea. The tray made of softwood could float on the water. By placing alcohol and tea on it, one could imbibe it at any time during a bath. It was extremely convenient. Duanmu Qingwen wanted to invite Yi Yin into the bath, but it was not appropriate for her to pull Yi Yin's hand. Therefore, she stood by the bath's entrance, watching Yi Yin earnestly and with watery eyes. At that moment, Duanmu Qingwen appeared poised and dignified. But in fact, she was feeling somewhat nervous. Although she came from the Duanmu family and enjoyed a particular status in the Wenyue country, she knew how low her status was in the Myriad Godridge. Compared to personal disciples, the difference was as stark as the difference between night and day. Back when Duanmu Qingwen missed the opportunity to serve personal disciples, she had been somewhat disappointed. But despite abandoning hope, a twist of fate suddenly offered her such an opportunity. As such, she cherished this opportunity even more. Although her Duanmu family wielded great power, her patriarch was aged. His lifespan was coming to an end, and if she could not hold up the family, the Duanmu family's position would be in extreme danger. Now, she had been in Sunken Moon Tower for a day. Therefore, she was naturally meticulous and careful, for there was no way she could neglect young Mastery, the person she needed to serve. However, despite how much anticipation she had, she did not see any look of satisfaction on Yi Yun's face. Instead, she was panicked to find that he was frowning. Chapter 1247, Duanmu Qingwen. Translator, Citulin. Editor, Citulin. Young Master. Young Master, are you dissatisfied with me? Duanmu Qingwen probed carefully. Yi Yun did not reply to her. Instead, he closed his eyes and swept the Sunken Moon Tower's vicinity with his perception. He did not find a single trace of Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Zuoyan Xiaoyu was gone. Yi Yun suddenly felt an ominous foreboding. Yi Yun naturally remembered Duanmu Qingwen's name. Previously, Zuoyan Xiaoyu had mentioned that Duanmu Qingwen was an outer sect disciple that had entered Myriad Godridge together with her. Back then, Duanmu Qingwen wished to be a maidservant in the personal disciple division as well. She had even tried to use her family ties, but, in the end, the job landed in Zuoyan Xiaoyu's hands because of her slightly higher talent. If there were shifts, Duanmu Qingwen still shouldn't have been there. She was not a maidservant in the personal disciple zone at all. Although he knew this, Yi Yun still held hopes. He asked her, "Do you maidservants also take shifts? Zuoyan Xiaoyu was serving me previously. Where is she?" "Xiaoyu? She's been transferred away. It was the miscellaneous chores department that instructed me to replace her," replied Duanmu Qingwen. "She's been transferred." Duanmu Qingwen's answer sank Yi Yun's heart. Indeed, it was as he thought. There was no question on the reason. It must have been due to the banquet 4 days ago. Yi Yun was a personal disciple and, with his powerful strength, those people would not dare touch him. However, Zuoyan Xiaoyu was different. She was only an outer sect disciple, lacking in both strength and background. She could be easily strong-armed. Although the Myriad Godridge rules prohibited disciples from killing one another, there was not much punishment other than paying some spirit jade if a personal disciple were to kill an outer sect disciple. Song Bowen and that lanky youth were clearly not magnanimous people. Having suffered at Yi Yun's hand, they knew that there was no way to turn the tables, so they vented their anger on Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Back at the banquet, Zuoyan Xiaoyu had smacked Song Bowen and the lanky youth's faces at Yi Yun's request. As such, Zuoyan Xiaoyu's outcome could very likely be terrible. And the worst thing was, this was all a result of Yi Yun's own actions. Upon realizing this, Yi Yun was seized with remorse. His negligence put Zuoyan Xiaoyu in trouble. If he had brought Zuoyan Xiaoyu into his seclusion chamber, such a situation would not have happened. Where's Zuoyan Xiaoyu? Where did she go? Yi Yun's voice was rushed and unknowingly contained killing intent. It made Duanmu Qingwen frightened. I do not know. Duanmu Qingwen was truly startled by Yi Yun. She was only at the Yuan opening realm, and being enveloped by Yi Yun's killing intent was like a mortal standing naked in the cold wind. She trembled in fear. You replaced her, but you do not know where she is? Yi Yun took a step forward and glared at Duanmu Qingwen. Duanmu Qingwen shrunk backward, but, faced with Yi Yun's imposing stance, she was unable to endure. Unknowingly, she slumped into a chair and stared at Yi Yun with a face full of horror. She had previously heard from sisters about Yi Yun. As a newly recruited personal disciple, Yi Yun was not only excellent in bearing, he was also very powerful and nice to servants. When she was transferred to Sunken Moon Tower, she was the envy of many girls. She believed that being picked to serve Yi Yun was a stroke of luck that she accrued from several lifetimes. She wanted to diligently do her part. Everything she did today took her hours, and it was all done meticulously. However, not only did she fail to obtain a compliment from Yi Yun, she was also hounded by Yi Yun with questioning that was filled with killing intent. She felt truly aggrieved at that moment. I really do not know. As Duanmu Qingwen spoke, she was feeling emotionally hurt. Back when she entered the sect, she did not mind losing to Zuoyan Xiaoyu. But now, having replaced Zuoyan Xiaoyu, she had done so much only to be questioned by Yi Yun in such a fierce manner about Zuoyan Xiaoyu's whereabouts. It was impossible for Duanmu Qingwen to feel any sort of good about this. Upon seeing Duanmu Qingwen's reaction, Yi Yun took a step back. His remorse and anger towards Song Bowen had caused him to lose control of his emotions. "Sorry," Yi Yun said. On careful thought, Duanmu Qingwen likely had nothing to do with the matter. The Duanmu family was only a small family clan with a 7th-floor Dao Palace realm warrior at its head. There was no way they could have any relations with a personal disciple like Song Bowen. Perhaps, after Song Bowen had Zuoyan Xiaoyu transferred away, the miscellaneous chores department had casually selected another girl to replace her. And with Duanmu Qingwen having used her family connections previously, she was the next natural choice. Upon thinking things through, Yi Yun held Duanmu Qingwen's hand and helped her up from the chair. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm only feeling anxious over Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Things have happened that you are unaware of. I'm afraid Xiaoyu is in trouble. Where is the miscellaneous chores department? Bring me there." Yi Yun repressed the pangs of fury in his heart and tried to speak calmly to Duanmu Qingwen. He knew very well that it had been some time since Zuoyan Xiaoyu was taken away. If Song Bowen and the lanky youth were bent on revenge, the odds were greatly against Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Such a long period of time was enough for them to do anything to Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Yi Yun had killed countless warriors in his many years of cultivation. However, he never harmed the innocent. He felt uneasy if a girl in her prime was destroyed because of him. "There will only be people in the miscellaneous chores department early tomorrow. Bring me there now." Yi Yun's tone did not leave room for doubt. All right. All right." Duanmu Qingwen was filling a myriad of emotions. She never expected Yi Yun to be so worried over Zuoyan Xiaoyu. As a myriad God-rich personal disciple, even an emperor had to treat him respectfully and fear him. Yet, he was worried over a mere maidservant that had no background. This made Duanmu Qingwen suddenly envious of Zuoyan Xiaoyu. If Yi Yun could be this nice to her, she would be willing to brave any dangers for him. There was more than one branch of the miscellaneous chores department. Every region had miscellaneous chores that needed to be done, so a miscellaneous chores department was set up in every region. Duanmu Qingwen led Yi Yun to the miscellaneous chores department in charge of the personal disciples zone. At that moment, the miscellaneous chores department was deserted and quiet. There was only a manager on duty. He looked to be in his 30s and had his legs crossed as he sat comfortably on a lounge chair. Beside him, a girl that looked like a maidservant was kneeling on a mat, massaging him. She was rather good-looking, but she was only a mortal. Although the myriad Godrich would choose virgin female outer sect disciples with talent and excellent looks as maidservants, the selected were only used to serve personal disciples. To put it frankly, the myriad Godrich had considered that some maidservants would be fancied by the personal disciples. Therefore, there was a strict requirement for the maidservant's talent. Girls with great talent would be beneficial to the personal disciples' cultivation level after they extracted their primordial yin. As for the manager, he naturally did not get such preferential treatment. The servant beside him was likely one that he bought himself. Chapter 1248 Evil Motives. Translator, Situlin Editor, Situlin. Use more strength. What did I buy you for? The manager took another puff from his smoke pipe as he grumbled unhappily. He sensed the people entering, but he paid them no mind. He had been a manager of the miscellaneous chores department for centuries. It was a lucrative job, and the outer sect disciples that came to his department would always treat him respectfully. He was already accustomed to leading a life of a lord. Manager Song. Qingwen spoke. Who's there? The middle-aged manager put down the smoke pipe and glanced at Duanmu Qingwen. Following that, he shot a glance at Yun before lying down comfortably on his chair. He sucked a huge mouthful of smoke and languidly said, "Come back tomorrow. I'm not going to handle any matters now." Perhaps some outer sect disciple was here trying to pull some social strings. Without sufficient benefits, he wouldn't even bother speaking, much less take part in a deal. Yun looked coldly at the middle-aged man and said, "Your surname is Song? You are a family member of Song Bowen?" Yun knew very well that in the Myriad Godridge, there were many family clans with long heritages. When some of these family clans reached a place of influence, they would tend to commit nepotism, allowing their family clan to further entrench themselves in Myriad Godridge and gradually grow stronger. Who are you? The middle-aged man gave Yun a displeased look. He did not know Yun, but, after seeing Duanmu Qingwen, he had a vague guess. This is my master, Yun, explained Duanmu Qingwen. Ah? Young Master Yi? He hurriedly got up with a grumble as his face scrunched into an obsequious smile. So it's young Master Yi that is gracing me with his presence. You should have told me earlier. I'm Song Yuanpin. Look at me, failing to recognize a great person. Young Master Yi, have a seat please. Song Yuanpin bowed unctuously. His exceedingly sycophant gesture and acting irritated Yun greatly. Was it your Song family that had Zuoyan Xiaoyu transferred away? Ah. Zuoyan Xiaoyu? The middle-aged man's eyes flitted as he said ingratiatingly, "How could that be? The transfer of maidservants is decided by the miscellaneous chores department's headquarters. How can the Song family intervene?" The miscellaneous chores department felt that if Zuoyan Xiaoyu could splatter food while carrying it, she was clumsy. Such a lass isn't fit for serving young Master Yi, so, naturally, she was transferred. Now, we have assigned a new maidservant to you. Not only is she beautiful and talented, she's also obedient. Look at how smart she looks, young Master Yi. She's probably 10 times better than Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Song Yuanpin had been manning the miscellaneous chores department for years and knew the proper way to deal with all sorts of people. He knew very well that most men would discard the old for something new. By giving Yun such a petite lass, allowing him to indulge in sexual pleasures, it would be a great boon he could not resist. As for Zuoyan Xiaoyu, she was a mere girl, more like an ant than a woman. She would be forgotten by Yun in less than 2 days. Therefore, Song Yuanpin thought nothing of transferring Zuoyan Xiaoyu away. Her outcome was the least of his worries. Who did care about a lass like her? Then again, the lass was quite supple-looking. If only he didn't lack the status, he would have kept her for himself to enjoy. While these thoughts flashed across Song Yuanpin's mind, he continued beaming. One did not smack a smiling person. Song Yuanpin was considered a slippery one, so even though he was facing Yun, a person of much higher status than him, he was not worried. As long as he remained impervious to the questioning and pushed the blame, he could naturally dismiss Yun with his smiling face. Oh? Your explanation seems rather reasonable. Yun nodded. Just as his voice faded, he suddenly punched out. Pang! With a boom, Song Yuanpin cried out tragically. He flew backward like a ball as the lounge chair behind him was flattened. The maidservant that was massaging his leg was given a fright. She nearly thought that she was dead, but, despite such a violent explosion, she was not injured at all. I. Cough. Song Yuanping had been struck in the dantian by Yi Yun. His mouth was covered in blood and he was in a daze. All he saw were doubles, particularly of Yi Yun. He never expected to encounter such a malignant star. He was struck before he could finish delivering his excuses. I left your dantian intact with this punch. The next one will cripple you. Go ahead and test my patience. Yi Yun was overbearing. He knew he would offend the Song family, but so what? Everything he did at Myriad Godridge boiled down to him finding Old Snake. And since he had accomplished that goal, he didn't exactly need to stay in Myriad Godridge. This was the reason why Yi Yun acted unbridled. Since the Myriad Godridge was an expedient measure, there was no reason for him to be bullied everywhere and suffer in silence. He might as well do as is pleased, allowing his mind to feel at ease. Don't do that. Spare me. Upon hearing Yi Yun threatening to cripple him of his dantian, Sun Yuanping's face turned pale. He knew very well what sort of person Yi Yun was. He would definitely carry out his threat. He even dared to beat Song Bowen, much less a trivial Song family member like him. Crippling him was nothing. Yi Yun was the sect master's personal disciple after all. The Song family could not attack Yi Yun, for the sect master wasn't from the Song family. When the time came, he would sacrifice himself in the war. Who would mourn him? Even the Song family would abandon him like roadkill. Zhuo Yanxiaoyu was taken by Song Bowen to be his servant, Song Yuanping said through clenched teeth. Now that he told Yi Yun, if Yi Yun caused a big hoo-ha over the matter, the Song family would learn it was him who leaked the news. He too would suffer greatly. What? He sure has guts. Does he have a death wish because of a servant? Yi Yun's eyes flared with killing intent. Where is Song Bowen? He went out on an experiential training expedition. He applied for the sect's permission the day before yesterday. He left early this morning. By now he must have traveled through a teleportation array and is millions of miles away. I'm telling the truth, nothing but the truth. Song Yuanping babbled on. He was afraid that Yi Yun would strike him again. It was not something he could withstand. Out on experiential training. Yi Yun's gaze turned cold. Song Bowen and that lanky youth had applied to go on an experiential training together. Song Bowen did not even plan on staying in Myriad Godridge to recover from his injuries because of a malignant star like Yi Yun. They had their faces smacked rotten by Yi Yun but could only suffer in silence. In the future, they would hardly be able to lift their heads in the personal disciples zone. How could they stay? With all the talk and mockery from others, they could only choose to leave for an experiential training expedition. But leaving in such a downtrodden manner was something they were unwilling to do. Since they could not deal with Yi Yun, they took their anger out on Zhuo Yanxiaoyu. From Song Bowen and the lanky youth's point of view, the lass had acted arrogantly because of Yi Yun's backing. It left them fuming with anger. Now, bringing Zhuo Yanxiaoyu out and ravaging her would give them a small spiritual victory. If not, the sense of defeat Yi Yun had given them would be too immense. It was turning into a mental demon that plagued them. It could even affect their future breakthroughs. By venting their anger on Zhuo Yanxiaoyu, it allowed them to redeem the situation slightly. As for Yi Yun's wrath, it did not worry them. Firstly, Yi Yun knew no one in Myriad Godridge. It would be difficult for him to find news of Zhuo Yanxiaoyu. Furthermore, a maidservant he only got to know for a few days was unlikely important. He would probably forget about her if he failed to find her. Song Bowen never imagined that Yi Yun would be that violent when questioning others. Neither did he think that Song Yuanping would be so cowardly to instantly inform Yi Yun of Zhuo Yanxiaoyu's whereabouts. Millions of miles. Yi Yun's heart sank. How was he to pursue them when they had flown that far? In which direction did they go? I do not know. I really do not know, Song Yuanpin said in a fluster. He was only a miscellaneous chores department manager, so how could he know the experiential training destination of personal disciples? In order to prevent opposing sects from harming personal disciples, such things were absolutely confidential. Typically, only the disciples' respective masters would know. Good, very good. Yi Yun was burning with anger as he stepped on Song Yuanpin's face. The sorry man let out a squeal like a pig in a slaughterhouse. His facial bones cracked and his facial features were rampaged into a mess. Killing Song Yuanpin was pointless. He was only a useless figure in the Song family. The people that wanted to harm Zuoyan Xiaoyu was Song Bowen and the lanky youth. No matter how he dealt with Song Yuanpin, it would not be able to appease his anger. Instead, it would give the Song family an excuse to attack him. Song Bowen, I seldom get disgusted by trivial figures, but you have succeeded. Having practiced martial arts for decades, Yi Yun's enemies were usually much stronger than he was. Occasionally, he would encounter an opponent of the younger generation, but he would step over them and overlook them in a lofty manner. Song Bowen was nothing. He had been easily trampled by Yi Yun 4 days ago, but now, he had disgusted Yi Yun greatly. Young master, what do we do? Duanmu Qingwen realized the gravity of the situation. Although she and Zuoyan Xiaoyu were competitors, they were both girls with the status of maidservants. She subconsciously treated Zuoyan Xiaoyu's experiences as her own. To a girl, that was completely unimaginable. Yi Yun took a deep breath. He was out of ideas at that moment, but he could not sit idly by as Zuoyan Xiaoyu was destroyed by Song Bowen. However, it was easy to infer that Song Bowen and the lanky youth would not be back any time soon. They were deliberately avoiding him, so it would be difficult to kill them. With millions of miles separating them and without any inkling of direction, how was he to pursue them? Now, the only person that knew Song Bowen and the lanky youth's destination was probably their master, Elder Taiching. Unfortunately, it would be a joke to question Elder Taiching. Chapter 1249, The Pleasant Surprise in the Ring. Translator, Situlin Editor, Situlin. Above the vast calm sea, the night sky was without clouds. The bright moon hung high and, as the calm sea lacked waves, it reflected the bright and clear moon on its surface. It looked immense and distant, with infinite silent beauty. At that moment, a humongous spirit ship tore through the calmness of the night. It was heading straight for the deep depths of the calm sea. The sinkhole's calm sea contains several islands. Having existed for hundreds of millions of years, they produced all sorts of treasures. This spirit ship was heading for these islands in search of their treasures. One thing that should be mentioned is that, even more than the treasures it was seeking, just the spirit ship itself was priceless. This was a supreme-grade spirit ship that experts at the Divine Lord level might not possess. It traveled at very fast speeds and was extremely stable. There was a spatial array on the spirit ship, so it could make long-distance warps without using a teleportation array. The spirit ship was extremely expensive, yet there was little worry about it being robbed when used outside. Few people could chase up to such a spirit ship, and secondly, there was a concealment array on the surface of the spirit ship. Even a person whose cultivation level had reached the late stages of a supremacy would hardly be able to sense the existence of the spirit ship. If one went into the spirit ship, they would marvel at the luxurious and comfortable interior. There were spatial dimension laws engraved in its main cabin, making what was 100 feet long cabin bigger by more than 100 times. It transformed into a luxurious palace. Inside the palace's main hall, there were 2 large and soft beds. Each bed was currently being enjoyed by a relaxed man. Both of them were soaking their feet in a wooden pail. They each had a maidservant attending them, washing their feet. If Yi Yun was here, he would have recognized these people immediately. They were none other than the lanky youth and Song Bowen. The lanky youth's name was Zhang Wuchen. Although he was not from the Song family, he was deeply affiliated with them. In order to rope him in, they had married off Song Bowen's cousin to him a decade ago. With this connection, Zhang Wuchen and Song Bowen naturally became good friends. In fact, the idea of bringing Zuoyan Xiaoyu out on experiential training was Zhang Wuchen's idea. Brother-in-law, although most personal disciples wouldn't think too much of a maidservant's life, that Yi Yun is quite an exception. He even gave a portion of the food cooked by Elder Lanqin to that little slut. He will probably investigate this matter and, once he finds out that Zuoyan Xiaoyu was taken away by us, he will definitely not take the insult lying down. Song Bowen was truly worried. He was truly afraid of Yi Yun deep down. It made him lack the courage to ravage Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Brother Bowen, you're thinking about this way too much. Yes, you were defeated by Yi Yun, but you have only cultivated for 180 years. Your cultivation level is only at the third floor Dao Palace, a floor lower than Yi Yun. Besides, that little bastard, Yi Yun, has probably cultivated for 4 or 5 centuries and deliberately represses his cultivation level to study the laws. It's only natural that you can't beat him. I know, but the difference is too great. Song Bowen, who was always competitive, had no choice but to admit that there was a huge gap between him and Yi Yun. Why are you so downtrodden? We haven't tested Yi Yun's age yet. I doubt he's as young as he looks. He might be strong, but, in the future, it's not like we won't be able to retaliate. Besides, we still have the Song and Zhang family backing us. That little bastard has no reason to try anything against us, especially over some mere maidservant. If he brings it up to the table of elders, they will at most get us to pay him with a new maidservant. In fact, I'm quite looking forward to how that little bastard will pursue the matter. If he truly cares for Zuoyan Xiaoyu, all the better. I want to let him know what it means to be truly disgusted. I'll teach that bitch a good lesson and enjoy her company. I can tell that she has plenty of primordial yin and should still be a virgin. That bastard's unwillingness to enjoy her has benefited me. I will do this bitch so good that the orgasm she enjoys will have her craving death. I want him so infuriated that his mind is never at ease. The best would be if his anger breeds a mental demon. Zhang Wuchen chuckled deviantly when he said that. Sui, Yenner, have you taught that bitch a lesson? Bring her to me. It's time I indulge in her. As he spoke, Zhang Wuchen took off his bathrobes, revealing the firm muscles of his upper body. He was already bordering on impatience. The only reason he had held back this long was that Song Bowen's second uncle had been following them. He watched over them as they passed through the waveless continent, a territory of an opposing sect. His second uncle had gone with them to ensure that nothing bad happened. Now that they were above the calm sea, there was no one around. With the spirit ship's safety ensured, Song Bowen's second uncle naturally left. Now, he could do as he pleased. Yes, young master. The two naturally endowed maidservants brought Zuoyan Xiaoyu over as they gyrated their hips. The maidservant named Yenner was the one who had tripped Zuoyan Xiaoyu at the banquet. Yenner and Sui had been with Zhang Wuchen for more than a year. He favored them greatly, so he had brought the two girls with him. He could enjoy them at any time. Zuoyan Xiaoyu was brought out. Her body was covered in bruises. She had been slapped in the face several times, leaving a few shocking red palm prints. Little slut, I'll dig out your eyes if you continue crying. Quick, go serve our young master. Yenner yanked at Zuoyan Xiaoyu's hair and threw her heavily to the ground. She may have looked petite and adorable, but in fact, she had an extremely vicious heart. She was envious that Zuoyan Xiaoyu was able to eat the spirit food prepared by Elder Lanqin and yearned to dig out the little bitch's eyes. Now, she finally had a chance for revenge. The death sentence had already been passed for Zuoyan Xiaoyu, and it would be a gruesome end. Previously, with the Song family's second uncle present, Yenner wasn't able to accompany Zhang Wuchen. And since she had nothing better to do, she would teach Zuoyan Xiaoyu a lesson from time to time. Most of the injuries on Zuoyan Xiaoyu's body were inflicted by her. Why did you do this to her? Look at her face, it's swollen because of your slapping. How am I to be in the mood for pleasuring myself with her in a while, said Zhang Wuchen unhappily when he saw the originally petite Zuoyan Xiaoyu in such a dire state. Young master, why do you say that? I have already prepared some healing medicine that can instantly treat her wounds, making her so beautiful that even her skin can tear from a gentle breeze. Young master, feel free to enjoy her. Yenner said sweetly and deliberately lifting her garment up, revealing a large portion of her bosom before taking out a bottle of medicine. Zhang Wuchen was sexually aroused as he watched Yenner. This little bitch was truly unrestrained. This was the reason why he favored her so greatly. But on the other hand, a delicate flower like Zuoyan Xiaoyu was a fresh experience. Zhang Wuchen got up from his bed and removed his legs from the wooden pail. Yenner hurriedly took a cloth to wipe Zhang Wuchen's feet. However, Zhang Wuchen waved his hand, indicating that there was no need. He stretched out one leg and said to Zuoyan Xiaoyu, kneel down and crawl over. Lick my feet clean. If you lick them to my satisfaction, I'll be gentle on you later. If not, I'll be taking your primordialine, sucking you to the point of your cultivation level dropping. Although your cultivation level is nothing to me, I am well versed in several bed techniques. Once I demonstrate them, it will be endless fun. Ha 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 ha. Zhang Wuchen laughed maniacally and in a somewhat perverted manner. He was greatly enjoying the feeling of freely ravaging Yi Yun's maidservant. He hated one thing the most in his life, his woman being screwed by others. If that woman was someone he had not placed his hands on and was even a virgin, the hatred would only deepen. Zhang Wuchen believed that most men would never admit it, but from his point of view, the best feeling was to have his enemies' women taken from them and ravaged. It would be even greater if the girl's primordial Yin was still intact. He wanted to use the most vicious method to seek revenge on Yi Yun. As such, the mental demon that Yi Yun had given him would be reduced to its nadir. Kill me. Zuoyan Xiaoyu was pressed down to the ground by Yenner. Her pretty face was filled with unyielding anger. It was all right if she could no longer have the joy of serving Yi Yun. All she needed was do well at the new job the miscellaneous chores department gave her. However, she never expected that the miscellaneous chores department had someone from the Song family. He had directly arranged for her to accompany Song Bowen and Zhang Wuchen out on experiential training. This sudden, cruel twist was as though she had plummeted into hell. You want death? It won't be that simple. I have sealed your cultivation powers, so there's no way you can kill yourself by severing your own meridians. I'll teach you well. I want you to submit to me, lying in front of me like a bitch. So you're tenacious? Let's see how long you can last. Yenner. As Zhang Wuchen spoke, he turned towards Yenner. Yenner smiled in a seductive manner. Yes, master. I'll teach her a good lesson. With that said, she pulled out a thin silver needle from her dense, long hair. The needle was a foot long and the glimmer the needlepoint diffused left a chill down people's backs. This is a marrow intrusion needle. Just being gently pricked by it will give a person a sensual orgasm. If it's pricked into flesh, the pain will be no less than being sliced by 1,000 blades. If it's stabbed into the bone marrow, the soul will feel a pain like it's being torn apart. These are probably the most terrifying pains I can imagine. Enjoy it well. As Yenner laughed, another maidservant grabbed Zuoyan Xiaoyu. Her needle gently aimed at the back of Zuoyan Xiaoyu's neck. At that moment, Yi Yun was still in Myriad God Ridge, millions of miles away. He had already returned to his residence with Duan Muqingwen. His mind was in chaos and could not calm himself. Regardless of how he counted the time or thought of various methods, there was no way he could save Zuoyan Xiaoyu. This left Yi Yun feeling extremely bitter. He swore that if Zuoyan Xiaoyu was ravaged to death, he would destroy the entire Song family one day and have them accompany Zuoyan Xiaoyu in death. As for Song Bowen and that lanky youth, he would extract their souls and refine their marrows to conciliate the hatred he had. Young master, I have caused trouble for Xiaoyu. Duanmu Qingwen was at a loss as to what to say. She was originally secretly delighted that she could replace Zuoyan Xiaoyu as Yi Yun's maidservant, but having learned of the situation, with Zuoyan Xiaoyu likely being tormented to death, her joy was gone. Only remorse was left. She felt that her luck had been established on the cruelty Zuoyan Xiaoyu was suffering. This matter weighed down on her conscience. This has nothing to do with you, Yi Yun said coldly. He had no mood to care for Duanmu Qingwen's feelings. He was still too weak. If he was sufficiently strong, he could storm the Song family and grab the patriarch. With his hands gripping the patriarch's neck, Song Bowen's location could be immediately obtained. But now, with him in Myriad God Ridge amid even more powerful beings, he could not destroy the rules without having sufficient strength. Even if this matter reached the table of elders, it would be advantageous to the Song family. What was a maidservant's life worth? Then, suddenly, knock knock knock. There was a series of knocks on the door. Duanmu Qingwen hurriedly opened the door while Yi Yun could not be bothered with the visitor's identity. When the door opened, Yi Yun listlessly took a glance. Standing by the door was Snake Girl? Yi Yun had not seen Snake Girl in days. He was somewhat perplexed. What are you doing here? Yi Yun had quite a good impression of the disciple Old Snake had randomly taken in. Although he was in a bad mood, he tried his best to repress his feelings when facing Snake Girl. Snake Girl shrugged. Can't I come? Master told me to remind you to not forget the alcohol treat tomorrow at Myriad God Restaurant. Alcohol? Yi Yun recalled that he had set up an appointment with Old Snake of 5 days after entering Myriad God Ridge. Tomorrow was the 5th day. If this was a few days back, he would have looked forward to talking to Old Snake. He had many questions to ask him, but now, he lacked that mood. Yi Yun waved his hand with flagging interest and said, Tell your master that I don't feel like drinking at the moment. Another day perhaps. Another day? Snake Girl was taken aback as she looked oddly at Yi Yun. What's wrong? Master told me that you would change the date when he told me to come to you. I refused to believe him, saying that you came all the way to Myriad God Ridge to look for him, so why would you change the date? Who knew that he'd actually be right? You are really changing the date. What? Yi Yun was taken aback. Old Snake had guessed it? Master also said that he has a present for you. Once you see it, you won't want to change the date, and you'll even treat him to the best wine. As Snake Girl spoke, she handed him an interspatial ring. Yi Yun was baffled. He vaguely realized a possibility as he grabbed the interspatial ring. He touched it and took out an ancient and unadorned bronze circular disc. It was a disc array. Yi Yun looked at the various runes engraved on the bronze disc array. Immediately, he understood that it was a long-distance teleportation array that had a one-time use. Yi Yun's master was Felicitas Rainlord, and so he had a deep understanding of spatial dimension laws. He quickly understood how to use the teleportation array. There was only one pair of such one-time teleportation devices. If one teleportation disk array was used, one would immediately appear at the other teleportation disk array. There was no need for a fixed teleportation. Could it be? Yi Yun suddenly realized a possibility. His heart raced as he said, Qingwen, take care of Snake Girl. I'll be entering my cultivation chamber for seclusion. Do not disturb me. Also, regarding this disc array, do not tell anyone. Do you understand? After Yi Yun said those words, his body vanished like a gust of wind, leaving Duanmu Qingwen and Snake Girl with widened eyes. Both of them still did not know what had just happened. Why would young master suddenly be so spirited? What is up with that disc array? Duanmu Qingwen murmured curiously. She obviously could not understand the disc array. Snake Girl was also left blindly guessing. She had followed Old Snake for years but didn't learn much. Most of the time, she would watch Old Snake engage in the vices. As for the skills Old Snake taught her, it was only a crappy Old Snake divine skill. Just the name alone rendered people speechless. Snake Girl did not have a good background, so she kept her hopes up and practiced the Old Snake divine skill properly. However, the crappy cultivation technique was exceedingly average. It was useless even after being honed for a long time. Snake Girl could not detect anything special about the disc array Old Snake had given her. She even thought that the old man had picked up some garbage on the ground. Who knew that Iyun would be so excited after seeing the disc array? At that moment, Iyun had already entered his cultivation chamber. He immediately activated the array formation, sealing the chamber. He took a deep breath and picked up the bronze disc array. He injected his Yuan Qi in as the runes lit up one by one. A spatial door slowly opened. Chapter 1250, Life Worse Than Death. Translator, Citulin Editor, Citulin. Ah! In the palace within the spirit ship, a girl screamed. It was a heart-wrenching cry. This is only the third one. I haven't even stabbed your bone marrow, but look at you, your entire body is convulsing. I should let you drink some water. Perhaps, you might end up failing to stop yourself from urinating. Yennefer cackled delightfully. Many times, women can be more ruthless than men. When it comes to the struggle for power and profit, many women will scheme in all sorts of ways and employ the cruelest of measures. These situations often occurred in the royal palace's harem, large family clans, and large sections. Such situations gave rise to women with evil thoughts. For you to last this long under the marrow intrusion needle, could it be that you are still clinging to hopes that your little lover boy will come rescue you? We are millions of miles from Myriad God Ridge. Ignoring the fact that your lover boy doesn't know that you are here, but even if he were to know, he won't be able to enter this spirit ship. As for you, I'll turn you into an obedient little bitch in an hour. In fact, you might not know this, but before we brought you over, young master had even sent a gorgeous and petite beauty to Iyun. Perhaps, he's currently enjoying the pleasures of sex with that beauty so much that he doesn't have the mood to even think about you. Yennefer was still envious that Iyun had given the food cooked by Elder Lanqin to Zuoyan Xiaoyu and was deliberately trying to provoke her. Zuoyan Xiaoyu obviously knew that it was impossible for Iyun to save her. She did not count on that happening. She had endured so long because she knew she was definitely doomed today. But even if she was fated to lose her life, she did not want to lose the last shred of dignity she had before dying. Yennefer, I got you to investigate this lass's family. Did you find anything? Zhang Wuchen suddenly asked. Yennefer giggled when she heard that. Young master, how can I forget your instructions? It only took me 2 days to find out a lot about her. This lass's father died a long time ago. She used her mother's surname and I think her name is Zuoyan Shu. When she suddenly heard her mother's name, Zuoyan Xiaoyu's body jolted vigorously. She looked up at Zhang Wuchen. The man on the bed was smiling, but the smile looked as hideous to her as it could be. Zuoyan Xiaoyu's heart was quivering. She believed that suffering all of it alone was enough. At most, she would die with dignity, but she never expected her mother to be implicated. She had stepped out of a mountain village and into the martial path. Finally, she entered the Myriad God Ridge. Her initial motivation was to give her mother, who brought her up arduously, a good life. But she never imagined that she would implicate her mother in the end. Don't hurt my mother. No. I beg you. Zuoyan Xiaoyu knelt on the ground as she underwent a meltdown. How could I hurt your mother? You are overthinking things. Climb over here and obediently lick my feet clean. Then, lie down on my bed and beg me to enter your body. If your cries are arousing enough and you serve me well, I'll guarantee you that your mother will live a good life, Zhang Wuchen said smugly. Everyone had a chink in their armor. How could Zuoyan Xiaoyu be his match? Ah, brother-in-law, you are impressive. It looks like this lass will submit very soon. How about this, you can take her primordial Yin and, for the first after that, leave it to me. Let me enjoy her too, Song Bowen said with a chuckle. He might have been worried over Yin before, but now he had thought it through. He decided to indulge in pleasure first, before considering anything else. Anyway, the experiential training would last several years. When he was done, his strength would probably increase significantly. Of course you can. Zhang Wuchen nodded with a smile before looking back at Zuoyan Xiaoyu. What are you waiting for? Aren't you coming over to lick? Do you not care for your mother's survival? Upon seeing Zuoyan Xiaoyu kneeling on the ground without taking any action, Zhang Wuchen turned impatient. Yenner yanked Zuoyan Xiaoyu's ear. Did you hear the young master's question? Yenner gently held the silver needle as the other maidservant giggled. After many years of serving Zhang Wuchen and living with the machinations that filled Myriad Godridge, her mind had turned somewhat twisted. She was eager to see a delicate girl degenerate into a nymphomaniac, just like her. Where should I stab next? Your ears look rather pretty. What would happen if I stabbed this into your ear? As Yenner spoke, the needle slowly approached Zuoyan Xiaoyu's ear. The mere thought of the pain left people shuddering. However, Zuoyan Xiaoyu did not seem to react at all. She knelt on the ground with her heart completely overwhelmed by despair. Not only was she going to die today, she would also lose all her dignity. Slut! Enjoy this! Yenner thrust the silver needle with all her might in an attempt to rupture Zuoyan Xiaoyu's eardrum, but at that moment, she felt her wrist turn cold as though an icy wind had blown across it. Following that, she felt her hand lose its sense of balance. Pa! The needle-wielding hand of Yenner fell straight to the ground. Upon seeing this scene, Yenner was left confounded. She stared in a daze at her wrist that had been reduced to a stump as blood flowed out incessantly. My hand! My hand! Yenner screamed sharply as she held her wrist while she broke out into a cold sweat. Who is it? Zhang Wuchen was alarmed. He was on board the Song family's top spirit ship. Its defensive and concealment array formations were top-notch. How could anyone infiltrate the spirit ship and cleave off Yenner's hand without being noticed? Song Bowen also jumped up from his bed immediately and touched his interspatial ring. But at that moment, Song Bowen felt an intense killing intent lock onto him. It was as though his head would fall off the moment he moved. He saw a figure walk out from the corner of the hall's shadows. It was as though the hall led straight to hell, and the person was stepping out of hell while accompanied by hellish infernos. He was dressed in black and there were gray flames lingering around his body. The flames crackled lightly and seemed calm, but the highly concentrated heat wave seemed to burn through the entire void. When the person walked into the middle of the hall, everyone held their breaths. Young master. Zuoyan Xiaoyu, who had been tormented to the point of feeling groggy, saw Yi Yun's face. She refused to believe what was happening. Was she having a dream? Yi Yun. Upon discerning the figure, Song Bowen was frightened out of his wits. Impossible. Zhang Wuchen found it unbelievable. After seeing Yi Yun, his calm facade dropped and he became immediately flustered. How could Yi Yun appear in this spirit ship? Before they set off, Yi Yun was still in seclusion. It should have been impossible for him to infiltrate the spirit ship. After all, the spirit ship had Song Bowen's second uncle, Song Guanyan, protecting it. Song Guanyan was at the Divine Lord realm, and he was the strongest person in the Song family. Even if Yi Yun had secretly snuck onto the spirit ship, it should have been impossible for him to go unnoticed by Song Guanyan's perception. As for chasing up to the spirit ship and infiltrating it, that was even more impossible. They had traveled incognito and at very fast speeds. In addition, the spirit ship, Great Traversal Spirit Ship, actually belonged to Song Guanyan. It took him several years of saving to buy it. As he placed great importance on Song Bowen and Zhang Wuchen's safety, he had lent it to them for this journey. Even if Yi Yun did possess immense ability, it was impossible for him to noiselessly come on board. Furthermore, the moment he appeared was too perfect. Song Guanyan had left the spirit ship an hour ago and, without any surprise, Song Guanyan had already passed through a teleportation array. He was now millions of miles away and it was impossible for him to come back and save them. How was Yi Yun capable of this? Are you a ghost? Zhang Wuchen bellowed sharply as his heart was gripped by horror. You don't have to be concerned about whether I'm a ghost or not, but it's likely you will become a ghost very soon. Yi Yun's voice was fierce. He had practiced martial arts for so many years and had offended numerous people. However, few were like Zhang Wuchen. Despite not really provoking Yi Yun, his actions and how much of a scoundrel he was made Yi Yun think of squishing him to death like a fly. Phew! Just as Yi Yun's voice faded, an ancient and immense aura emanated from his body. It enveloped the surroundings into a black domain. This was Yi Yun's destructive power. He had wrapped everyone in his destruction domain. What is it? Zhang Wuchen panicked when he saw that he was trapped in the destruction domain. He had never come into contact with such laws. At that moment, the heretical godfire seed within Yi Yun's body spewed out, lashing out at the surroundings as the heat waves left everyone stifled. Don't go thinking I'm afraid of you. Zhang Wuchen bellowed. He was at the 7th floor Dao Palace, 2 sub-realms higher than Yi Yun. Furthermore, his strength exceeded Song Bowen, so although he did have some trepidation in fighting Yi Yun, he did believe that he had a chance of putting up a fight. But just as he finished his declaration, phew! Yi Yun's figure vanished like a ghost and instantly appeared in front of Zhang Wuchen. He was too fast. Ha! Zhang Wuchen roared as he pulled out a concealed saber and thrust it straight at Yi Yun's throat. But at that moment, the surrounding black domain transmitted indescribable powers that rapidly eroded his Yuan Qi. It instantly dissipated the strength that he had gathered. Following that, Yi Yun forcefully punched Zhang Wuchen in the abdomen. Pang! With a loud explosion, Zhang Wuchen bent over like a shrimp. You! Zhang Wuchen held his abdomen as blood spewed out of his mouth. He was feeling horror and despair. He never felt so helpless before as he realized that, even though he had evaluated Yi Yun's strength to be very high, his evaluations were a far cry from Yi Yun's true strength. The terrifying destruction laws prevented him from mustering any strength, nor could he gather the strength to resist at all. Yi Yun extended his hand as his Yuan Qi materialized into a rope that bound Zhang Wuchen. He was held up with his limbs sprawled open in front of Yi Yun. Yi Yun looked coldly at Zhang Wuchen. You seem to enjoy women? Yi Yun's words seemed to pummel him into an ice cavern. He suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. Could it be? Yi Yun, wait. Before Zhang Wuchen could even finish his words, Yi Yun had kicked right at the spot between Zhang Wuchen's legs. Pang! With a rapturous sound that sounded like eggs being crushed by a sledgehammer, Zhang Wuchen let out a shrill scream. His family jewels had been obliterated by Yi Yun's kick. To men, no other pain could be more excruciating than this. However, Zhang Wuchen's body was completely bound. Regardless of how painful his lower body was, he could not hold on to it. At that moment, Zhang Wuchen wished he could immediately die.